Well, Priya, I am so glad that we are having this conversation together. And for all of those who are listening today, I'm speaking. This is Vivek Murthy. I have the privilege of serving as the Surgeon General of the United States, and I have the great privilege of being in conversation today with Priya Parker, who has done so much in her life. But the themes that I have constantly picked out, from everything I've read that she's written and everything she's said, is just a tremendous expertise around how we gather, how we resolve conflict, how we exist as a community. And I think these are especially important during the time of this pandemic when we're trying to figure out how to reorient and how to rebuild our connection to others, and in many cases to ourselves. Priya also has a wonderful book called The Art of Gathering, which I've read. Certainly recommend anyone else to read as well. It's a fantastic book that really examines how we can gather more effectively and build community. So Priya, thanks so much for being here for this conversation. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. And it's a real treat for me to be in conversation with you, somebody who I think well before the pandemic began to argue and use your positional authority to connect social connection and loneliness to public health pandemic, and really elevate the conversation from something that is a nice to have to something that's fundamentally the kind of the social underpinning of our society. And so it's really a treat to be in conversation with you today.
Well, thank you so much, Priya, for that. I appreciate it. And I think that today's conversation is so timely because when I talk to people across the country, whether they're kids in school, whether they're college students, whether they're people who are retired or folks who are in the midst of their busy work lives, I hear questions often about what this moment means, about what it means now, but also how will it affect our lives in the months and years after the pandemic. And I was wondering if we could start there, Priya. I'd be curious to get your sense as somebody who's thought so much about community and connection. How do you make sense of this moment that we're in and the implications it has for how we connect with one another?
I think that we are individually, in small groups, and collectively at a moment of rethinking and resetting. And I'm not the only person to think that or to say that, but in many ways, before the pandemic hit, gathering was something that we took for granted. We were allowed to do. We were doing all of the time, often quite poorly. Whether it's being in meetings, texting under the table, or kind of not really paying attention in person, or over the phone, or at family reunions, or in our public square. Well before the pandemic, the ways in which many of us were coming together were broken. And yet we didn't have, in a sense, enough time, political will, focus, space to begin to actually look at how we structure our time individually and collectively. And I think what the pandemic has done for so many of us, has forced, is beginning to actually see the way we spend our time is chosen, it's invented, it's designed. And over the course of 14 or 16 months, when we haven't actually been able to gather in the ways that we were used to, we had to pause and actually ask, well, who do I want to come together with? When do I want to actually reach through that screen and I'm so deeply frustrated that I can't be with my colleagues? When am I willing to use my body to go into the streets and actually demand for a more just society? And I think so much of what we've been through is this collective and very forced and scary pause to begin to look and to ask, how should we spend our collective time?
And Priya, actually, let me pick up on that piece, because this pause that you mentioned, I think is really interesting, because pauses are really powerful. They could either be an opportunity for a reset, or they could mean we go back to just what was happening before the pause, right? What do you think is actually going to happen? And what do you think will make the difference? And whether we just go back to 2019 or whether we build something perhaps better, even more effective in terms of connection and community during and after this pandemic?
That's like the, $1 trillion question. I think that, I'm a conflict resolution facilitator. And in my work, for groups, and in my work, moments of transition are both the biggest moments of opportunity as well as the biggest moments of risk for any group. And groups that are able to basically look at what has happened, the process through which they went, the reckoning, the moment, and actually create time to reflect on it, to name it, to process it, to grieve it, to celebrate it, to actually just see it and not just rush through and be on autopilot, are the ones that actually have the possibility for some amount of change. And I think similarly, when in our workplaces right now, so many organizations and companies are thinking about, do we go back, which I think is the wrong question to your point. Do people regather in the offices? Do you, very practically, do you go back to work 5 days a week versus does everything go virtual versus do you do something hybrid? Is actually asking the wrong question. I mean, the questions that groups that are able to actually change are, what did we go through? What are we ready to discard? What do we actually love and celebrate? What did we secretly long for during this time? And what might we actually invent? And so I think you're a civil servant, and this is as true in our government, in the bills that are currently being debated, which is, what have we actually learned and how do we agitate to create the infrastructure so that we can actually transform through this moment rather than just going back to something that wasn't working, before. I'm curious to kind of turn the tables a little bit. I was, as I've watched and just so deeply benefited from your work, you were calling for us to look at loneliness as a public health issue well before the pandemic hit. You as a doctor diagnosed loneliness as a pre-existing condition. And I'm curious, all the way back, I don't know, 2017, 16, 15, before this actually has become even more acute, how did you begin to see that and make the link between loneliness as an individual experience versus something that's a public and collective risk?
Well, Priya, it happened because of the people that I met all across the country when I was Surgeon General during the Obama administration. And I began my tenure then just traveling the country and on a listening tour and asking people really a very basic question, which is, how can I help? And I tried to shut up as much as possible and listen to what they had to say. And one of the things that I heard unexpectedly during those travels, big cities, small towns all across America, were these stories of isolation and loneliness. And they didn't often come across directly. So people wouldn't say, my name is Priya, my name is Vivek, I'm lonely. But they would say things like, I've got all these challenges I've got to deal with in my life, but I've got to deal with them by myself. Or they would say, I walk through life feeling invisible, like nobody really cares. Or if I disappeared tomorrow, nobody would even notice. And what struck me is that, we have this caricature of loneliness, Priya, which is that we think of it as maybe an older person toward the end of their life living alone in a home, or we think about somebody who's painfully shy in the corner of a room at a party, not talking to anybody. But that loneliness actually doesn't often look like that. Loneliness, I realize, can present as a college student who seems fairly extroverted, is going to parties all the time, but really doesn't feel connected to anyone and doesn't feel like anybody really knows them. And so I was hearing this from many, many different people across the country. And two things that became really sort of relevant here is that, one, it connected back to my own personal experiences, struggling with loneliness as a child for much of my time in elementary school, and then at a number of points actually, as an adult, and also connected with my experiences as a doctor, caring for patients over the years and realizing that in addition to coming in for diabetes and for heart attacks and infections and cancer treatment, that there was often loneliness lurking in the back, of their stories, and it would come out often. I still very distinctly remember scenarios where we would have a very difficult diagnosis to give a patient a new diagnosis. And I would ask them, is there anybody you want me to call to be here so that we can have this conversation together? A family member, a friend. And so often they would say, I wish there was, but there's nobody. So I'll just have a conversation by myself. Even at the time of death, Priya, there were many patients whom I had the privilege to sit next to and to hold their hand and be with them in those final hours of life. And what pained me was how many of those patients experience those final moments alone as well, with nobody but the hospital staff to be with them. So the final thing that struck me, though, Priya, was the consequences of this loneliness for our health, for our physical health and our mental health. And this is the part that was striking to me and that I found ended up being striking to the public, which is that most people just thought about loneliness as a bad feeling. What I came to see is that there was a growing body of research associating loneliness with a higher risk of premature death, a higher risk of heart disease, depression, anxiety, sleep disturbances, and the list goes on. And so when you get into the science of it, there are actually reasons why there are those health impacts of loneliness, but all of it helped me realize that there was a deeper challenge that we were facing here in the country, because there were more people struggling with loneliness than had diabetes in the United States, yet you wouldn't know it from the public conversation about loneliness.
You know, what's interesting to me as I listen to you is you wear these dual hats, both as doctor or physician, that many doctors and first responders have this data within their own hospitals or within their own care practices. And then you also have this role as, Surgeon General, where you are seeing, because you're going out into the country, that this is not only in Brooklyn, this is not only in Toledo, this is not only in Sacramento, this is not only in Miami, and being able to actually see that what often we think of as an individual fault, right? Why am I so alone? Why am I so lonely? Why do I actually feel so apart from my community is actually a collective and national, tragedy. As you begin to, if you were to prescribe a good bill of health, or write a prescription to our nation right now, to begin to collectively face and cure this loneliness, what would be on that? What would be on that chit or that bill?
Well, Priya, it's two things I'd say. One is that you're speaking to this sense of shame that accompanies loneliness, which I think is so powerful. And I use that word shame intentionally because that's how it feels to so many people when they experience loneliness. It feels like something's wrong with them. They're socially deficient, that they're a loser in some way, not recognizing that so many people are struggling with the same, but also that experiencing loneliness from time to time is actually a normal part of the human experience. But in the extroverted world in which we live, we're made to feel like something's wrong with us if we struggle with loneliness. I also think that this moment has forced us into a reckoning around, are we individuals, 330 million individuals who live together or who just happen to live next to one another, or are we truly an interdependent community that recognizes that we depend on each other for our collective well-being, and we go farther when we recognize those collective needs and support one another. And we have to figure out what to do with that reckoning. That's a value choice about which way we go. But when I think about the prescription broadly, there's a lot of structural things we could point to that I think have made it more challenging for communities to build. There are a lot of cultural elements, around what we value in terms of collective versus the individual, but also what we teach our children about what constitutes success and meaning in their lives. Like, how often do we teach our children that success is actually building meaningful friendships and community? And not that we don't want that for our kids, but where is it on our list of priorities? How often do we talk about it, invest in it as a country? We don't gauge success by the community we create or the relationships we build. We often gauge success by tangible financial output or by promotion secured or papers published or books authored, right? And so I think a lot of this goes to a much deeper, fundamental cultural question and values question of where do relationships fit in our value system, and then should they be reflected in our actions, in our policies, and in how we design institutions, including workplaces and schools. But finally, the prescription in some ways, though, if I had to boil it down to one thing, it's actually fairly simple, which is that we need more love in the world, Priya. Love for one another, love for the people we know, but for the people we don't know, which is sometimes one of the hardest things to do, the people who are not like us, who may have different experiences, but who are bound together by the shared experience of being human. And a key thing that we need more love for is love for ourselves. So many people beat themselves up, in life, especially during this pandemic, feeling like they're not good enough, either because they're somehow not as productive as they were before the pandemic, or because they do experience moments of anxiety or depression, like many people have experienced during this pandemic. But all of that beating ourselves up, I think, actually doesn't always help us. And this is a big counter to the culture that, some of us grew up in, where we were told the harder we are on ourselves, the more we're going to push ourselves to be better. So it's not that we shouldn't hold ourselves to high standards, but I think there's a lot of shame and blame that we direct toward ourselves, which I think ultimately harms us in the long run.
As I listened to you, I'm reminded a little bit of the story Elizabeth Warren sometimes shares, where she, as she began to basically research bankruptcy and understand, people's credit card debt, and begin to interview thousands and thousands and thousands of people who were feeling shame and blame because they had to declare bankruptcy or they were in such debt. She began to see that it's not just individual values or moral values, it's actually a collective system. And you actually need infrastructure like a, credit bureau protection agency to begin to protect people from the system, from credit card companies in that context. And I think part of what the pandemic has highlighted even more is that, at some level, self-care as an idea is actually a symptom of a lack of institutional care, right? We are blaming ourselves individually, and think that we can kind of like think and love ourselves out of a system that actually isn't designed for things like, childcare, family parental leave, right? So part of loneliness and part of lack of interdependence is that I was speaking with the writer Anne Helen Peterson a few months ago. She gave this example of like 30 years ago, if there was a apartment building, there was some amount of at least cooperation in terms of something as simple as babysitting, where everybody would, share the same babysitter, and you have communal infrastructure through cooperatives. And now in a building, in part because of the way work is structured, in part because of a lack of things like parental leave or universal pre-K, you have 30 babysitters in 30 units, right? It's become even more individuated. And some of the ways that we actually think about our pooling our collective resources is a symptom of what both the jobs that we either have or don't have, but also what we think, whose responsibility we assume it is. And so I think I hope what comes out of this pandemic, and I hope what comes out of this administration, and I know we still have a second kind of infrastructure, the second part of the infrastructure bills that to hopefully pass, is to actually look at our systems and say, this is not just an individual problem to think about reaching out to the people that you love. This is actually a work problem and how much people are required to work. This is a resources problem. This is a health problem. This is a family paid leave problem. And I think the individualistic society that we are tends to fault the individual, when so much of what our collective loneliness is a result of both broken systems and frankly lack of free time to even do something like join an association, sort of in the Robert Putnam mode. And so I think that a lot of these problems are collective and structural, and we individually, I wrote this book, The Art of Gathering, in part because I think that we are also not trained to gather well. And we are not, as our institutions and trusted institutions have declined, and our like high priests, both literally and metaphorically, are no longer the epicenters of the community to be able to create meaning. Like the democratization of meaning making, right, has increased. We each have to gather our people now. And we need to think about how we need to learn how to do it better. But it's also because our systems are crumbling.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good point you make, Priya. This powerful interplay between our values and the structures in which we live, right? And our structures, in many ways, reflect our values, and our values can inform and drive our structures. And this is where I think we have some real rethinking to do. Like, my worry is if you pass a series of laws that put structures in place that can help people, but fundamentally, individuals in society don't feel that they have a responsibility to one another, that they are truly invested in the outcome of other people who are not like them, who may not have as much money as them or privilege as them, et cetera, then I worry about the long-term sustainability of those structures, right? But on the other hand, if you have values that don't translate through to our policies and practices, then the benefit, of the collective and those collective values does not manifest, and we don't lift all boats. And so that's, I find, like, what's really interesting about this moment that we're in, because the pandemic, as much as a crisis as it has been, I think does give us the opportunity to rethink this tension between the individual and the collective. Because if it's made anything clear, it's that you can't get through a pandemic just by working hard on your own, right? This is something where we truly, really do depend on one another.
And I think the rise also of public spaces. So if there's an in-between between the individual and then these large systems, things like parks, right? Public libraries are public gathering places, and the infrastructure and the resources put into them versus the privatization of, even the bookstore or private parks. And so even in the pandemic, I live in a city. So much of the few places one could actually go when the weather was decent is the park. And I think and part of the use of public space and where we deem, some of this can also be designed for, right? When we design and put resources into public parks that people want to go and spend to, then there's a bit of a nudge to go and take your children and bump into other people that you may or may not know, and be with people who are unlike you and doing different activities and visibly seeing that there's many ways to be, versus going to that private club and spending your Saturdays going and spending time in a privatized way. And so again, I think that there's individual choices, but also the ways that city and state and national governments decide to fund social infrastructure affects individual values as well. It's really both.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. And I don't think people have recognized how powerful those public spaces are. We know that, having green spaces, for example, or close to you is associated with a very positive impact on your health, social health, and, your overall physical health. So this is really important. I know our time together is drawing to a close. I could talk to you forever, and I'd love to pick your brain on so much. But one of the things I was really struck by, Priya, when I read your book a while ago, was just how chock full it was of really wonderful, practical, actionable tips for people who are looking to design gatherings more effectively. And I was wondering if, the last few minutes that we have here, if you could share with folks out there who might be thinking about their reentry, who might be responsible for a group at work or at school, or even their family, helping them readjust to this new normal, if you will, that we're in. What tips would you give them? Recognizing that obviously just forgetting that everything has happened and just asking people to go back to the way things were is not the right way to do it. But how can they help people adjust to the moment that we're in?
The way that I've been kind of framing it is to have people, it was sort of going back to our earlier conversation, in that moment of pause, asking, first of all, pausing, like creating a collective pause and not just rushing through it and pretending that everything's, normal again, whatever that is. And instead of asking the question, like, should we go back, or do you want to come back? That's the wrong question to ask. And to instead ask these 4 questions. The first, which is, what did you long for when we couldn't be together? Right? Whether you're faculty or teaching staff or educators in a school, when were the moments where you're just so frustrated, trying to reach through the screen? What did you long for? And actually ask people that and notice, like, oh, I really, because it builds their memory of, oh, there's reasons to come back. There's There's ways I couldn't just grab somebody for a coffee or walk down the hall in an informal way. The second, what didn't you miss? What are you ready to discard? The third, what did we invent during this time that was really interesting? And then the fourth, what do you want to invent now? And maybe I'll close on this example. I this past August, I did this series called The Gathering Makeover, where every week I would speak with a different person or group around the country who are kind of thinking about reentering. And one of the groups that I spent time with was a public high school in Virginia. And it was a group of administrators in Vienna, Virginia, Madison High School, where they were welcoming back, I think, 150 faculty members for the first time in 16 months. And I think, like so many communities, some had been there kind of all along because they were considered essential workers. Some didn't want to come back. I mean, a whole range. And what this group did for that first meeting back, that before the students came back, is that the building itself was under construction, which actually at first they worried about, and then they realized is a really powerful metaphor. And as faculty came, they handed out construction hats, and they literally said, like, "Welcome to the construction zone." And they had their teachers come and first just walk the hallways. And just literally, like, don't underestimate the power of just taking a breath and walking through, whether it's your offices and looking at the plants that have died that no one has tended to over the last 16 months, right? Pausing so that we actually remember physically in an embodied way what has transpired here. And then they invited they asked a number of different questions that teachers would stand and sit as they were able, if it was true for their experience. So, if you were worried about coming back, if you're thrilled to come back. And one of the things you begin to notice is we have inherent contradictions within ourselves, right? I could stand for I'm worried to come back, and I could stand I'm excited to come back. And they basically created like 2 or 3 hours to process in thoughtful ways the experiences that faculty had so that they can begin to think about that, so that they can then hold their students. And then the last thing they did was they put together like very simple paper and scissors and glue, and they invited them to build the school of the future. And it could be physically, we want a snack room, but it could also be psychologically and relationally. And it allowed the teachers to spend some time, again, processing. It's not rocket science. Processing, talking about, and then imagining and envisioning forward. What do we want to bring with us? What do we actually never want to do it again? And what might we invent now? And how do we do it in a way where we're looking at each other and we're doing this as part of a community, not just sort of an edict handed down from on high. And I think whether you're a group of friends, or whether you're a religious community or a community of faith, or whether you're a group of activists, or fill in the blank, to pause and to create time and space and structure, a little bit of structure to think about and collectively process, again, through simple conversation. What have we been through? What have we learned? And what do we want to build now?
That is so beautiful. What a powerful example that you just shared. As we wrap this conversation, I just want to reflect on a couple of themes that you've lifted up, which I think are so powerful. One is this power of pausing, which seems so simple, but is not often easy to do in a fast-paced life, but so critical. I think the importance of reflecting, and here a little bit of structure can go a long way, just like you said, in helping create the space and the circumstances for people to share a little bit more deeply about what they truly want. And I think that there's a powerful theme here that both of you and I have touched on, which is, I think, the importance of recognizing that this is a moment to reevaluate our connection and commitment to one another. And that, this is a time where we've got to care for ourselves, but also care for others, but ask ourselves, what is our responsibility to one another beyond the people that we know? And then finally, to make sure that this is reflected, ultimately, these reflections and realizations in how we live our lives, in the decisions we make about how we treat people, but also in the issues we choose to use our voice to advocate for in the public square. If we use this moment, this pandemic, to build stronger connection, to come together more tightly as a community to build the structures, policies, and programs and practices in our institutions that will allow us to lift up everyone, recognizing we do go farther when we go together. And we will have found an incredibly powerful silver lining in this pandemic. And that's what I hope that we're able to do together over the months and years ahead. But Priya, thank you so much for this conversation, for everything you have contributed to the world through your writing, your speaking. You certainly inspired me over recent years, and I know you'll continue to do so for many folks down the line. So appreciate you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Murthy, and thank you for your work and for using your position to elevate these conversations and making them super practical. So thank you for having me, and thank you to the 92nd Street Y for having us both.
Hi, I'm Dr. Jessica Clemens. I'm board certified psychiatrist and author of the Audible original Be Well, A Guide to Better Mental Health for All. And I am thrilled and happy to be a part of the 92Y Happiness Summit with Deepak Chopra, well-being practitioner and pioneer in integrative medicine, and also the author of the Audible original Mind Body Zone, Living Outside the Box. How are you today?
Thank you, Dr. Jess. It's a pleasure to speak to you and be on the same platform as you.
I feel the same. I'm really honored to have this discussion with you about happiness and mental health. Maybe we can start with your Audible original. Could you tell us about Mind Body Zone, Living Outside the Box?
Well, yes. First of all, I was privileged to be part of this Audible original, the Mind Body Zone, Living Outside the Box. But the people I spoke to, including Oprah, including some amazing revolutionary thinkers and creatives, people who were expert on trauma, on sexuality, on our relationship with the universe, what I realized is that they not only looked at the world from outside the box, they didn't have a box altogether. They were truly creative, and they were able to give an experience to me of freedom and creativity such that I related to their creativity as what I call fundamental creativity, not simulated creativity. Fundamental creativity is when you create a new story or a new product or a new service that never existed before. Okay, so like in the internet came about, or all these new technologies that we never had before. That's a very big change from what we see as simulated creativity through artificial intelligence, which is becoming very common these days. Fundamental creativity is when you change context, meaning, story, archetypes, and relationships, and the old story totally dies and a new story is born. So, when I interviewed the scientist Simard, she basically discovered mother trees that are mothers to not only their offspring or the same species, but every tree in the forest, something we didn't know, through a neural fungal network. There was Oprah talking about the power of vulnerability. And there was this amazing psychiatrist, Gabor Mate, talking about healing trauma and what he brought to light was everyone has been traumatized, therefore everyone needs healing, and on and on. So I just say this was an experience of freedom and learning and creativity for me as well.
I love to hear about the fundamental aspect of it. I think it's something that I'm, hoping to wrap my head around as I explore your Audible original. I'm so curious about happiness. That's obviously why everyone is here today. It's been on my mind, and I've had periods in my life where I've really grappled with it. How would you define happiness?
Well, there are many ways to define happiness, and people usually confuse happiness with joy. So happiness is always for a reason. Somebody wins the lottery, or they fall in love, or they get a job, or they become president of the company. So that kind of happiness comes from agencies. You need something to be happy. But when you're happy for no reason whatsoever, that's called joy. And it's our fundamental state. All you have to do is look at a baby. And unless the baby is hungry or wet, it's joyful. It's full of wonder. It's full of curiosity. And it doesn't have a reason. It's smiling, and actually babies bubble with bliss if you leave them alone. So what is that fundamental state? And that's a spiritual state of being connected to the source of all experience, which we call the true self, beyond our ego identity. And so that kind of experience of joy is not dependent on anything. Now, why I'm saying this is to create a context, because, I have had a relationship with His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, who is spontaneously joyful. He doesn't need a reason to be happy. Okay. And so one day in the year 2010, there was a bunch of us scientists, social scientists, and social scientists are always coming up with figures and formulas and data and metrics. And His Holiness Dalai Lama is very tolerant, and in fact encourages science, because he knows it's the religion of our times. So he said, why don't you come up to our group? He said, why don't you come up with a happiness formula? And so actually we did. The social scientists, led by a very intelligent social scientist from the University of California, Sonia Lyubomirsky, and everybody got together in a group. And then 2 years later, they came up with what is called the happiness formula. So now that you asked the question, let's share it with our audience. H is equal to S plus C plus V. H stands for happiness. S stands for set point in the brain. And this set point is produced by what we call the conditioned mind. So as a baby, if you were with parents and peers and your family, and later in school, you were with people who were constantly criticizing, condemning, playing the victim, or just unhappy, then you grow up to be unhappy. And if, on the other hand, your parents and your caretakers were always giving you attention, which means listening to you, affection, deep love and caring and compassion, appreciation, telling you about your unique gifts and being grateful to it, and accepting you, not changing you, then you grow up to be a happy person. Now, this happiness, what you call set point, as I said, is determined by our childhood upbringing, but it accounts for 50% of our happiness experience every day. Now, on the surface, this is not good news, because your set point was determined not by you, but by your caretakers. But then the good part of this is, now all the research shows that things like cognitive therapy, or something called awareness-based cognitive therapy, and something even more important, which is just self-reflection and mindfulness training, can change your set point. So you can change your set point from happiness, from unhappiness to happiness, if you have self-awareness and you practice some of the techniques we offer even on the Audible podcast. That's the first part of the formula. H is equal to S plus C. C is conditions of living, mainly money. So you would think, this is the very important part of being happy. But in fact, it only accounts for 10% of your happiness experience every day. So if somebody wins the lottery, they're going to be extremely happy in the beginning. In 6 months, they plateau. In 1 year, they're back to their set point. In 5 years, they become a little mean-spirited because their identity becomes money. They confuse self-worth with net worth. And, I have just written a book on abundance, which was inspired by Bob Marley and one of his lyrics. And he says, some people are so poor, all they have is money. And so money actually is the source of a lot of unhappiness. The extremely rich and the extremely poor are usually unhappy because their identity is money and they think about money all the time, both the extremely rich and the extremely poor. The extremely poor because they need money, and the extremely rich because they confuse, as I said, net worth with self-worth. So then there's 40% remaining. And this is the part that's called V. H is equal to S plus C, conditions of living, plus V, voluntary choices. Two kinds of choices we make every day. The first choice is for pleasure. So shopping is the most common reason for people wanting to be happy is shopping. You give them an iPhone 10, but then they want an iPhone 11. Then they want an iPhone 21. Then they want a yacht. Then they want an automobile, and on and on. So those experiences for personal pleasure, shopping, alcohol, entertainment, sex, they make you happy, but only for a short time. And then you have to repeat the activity so you can be happy again. And if you have an addictive personality, of course, you know that too much pleasure becomes addictive. And then addiction is the memory of pleasure, which is now no longer pleasure, it's painful. So there's a second choice that people make to be happy, and that's called fulfillment. When they have meaning and purpose in life, when they find a calling, then they find a reason to serve. And then there's something else, which is the fastest way to happiness, instant way to happiness, which is to make somebody else happy. And you can do that by giving them attention, affection, appreciation, and acceptance. Everyone who's on this Audible, they can send an emoticon to someone right now and say, I love you, I'm thinking of you, I'm there for you, I'm grateful for your uniqueness, I'm holding your back, and see what happens. You'll instantly give them a dopamine hit. And if they do that with 2 other people, and they do that with 2 other people, my dream is one day we can create a pandemic of happiness.
Wow, what an explanation for happiness. And, I can't help but think about the many ways that people can get there, and how you so simply put it. I mean, wow. I think I'm a mother I have a 1-year-old. And when you talked about the happiness that just comes from babies, I mean, it's so powerful to see this child is just happy unless he's hungry or wet, I can't help but think about that.
So Dr. Jess, as a mother, and especially 1-year-old, yet there's no verbal skills. So what they're looking at, by the way, are your eyes and the movement of your eyes. They're looking at your facial expressions. They're listening to the tone of your voice, and they're just guessing by your body language whether you're giving them attention, affection, appreciation, and acceptance. And that's all they're doing. And that creates a link between their emotional brain and your emotional brain, which we call the limbic brain. It's an actual biological phenomenon called limbic resonance, which then leads to limbic regulation and ultimately to limbic revision. The brain changes as a result of this experience of happiness. And that creates the set point. So watch out. Your baby is watching you very carefully, not listening to you, but watching you.
That is such great advice. I will keep that in mind. You're absolutely, just as you shared that, I can see different faces he may make in response to us.
We have 43 facial muscles that reflect about 100 different emotions. And nobody other than AI and babies can read these emotions.
My goodness. My goodness. Deepak, is it possible for everyone to experience happiness? Is this attainable?
So it's the ultimate goal of all goals. As a physician, many times I would ask my patients, so why do we want to get better? Well, I want to go back to my job. Why do you want to go back to your job? Well, I need to make a living. Why do you need to make a living? I need to take care of my family, send my children to school. I kept asking them, like babies do, why? And then they would say in the end, I just want to be happy. And then I realized that whatever we do, the end goal is happiness. So happiness is the goal of all goals. And the purpose of our existence is to find our joy. That's it. Joy is the healthiest response to existence. Otherwise, why bother living? I mean, you don't want to be on your deathbed and say, I worked so hard that now I have rotten teeth and heart attacks and cancer.
Absolutely. The truth here. Is there an intersection between mental health and happiness? And I'm a practicing psychiatrist, and people come in and they are looking for fulfillment. Obviously, some people are just looking to be able to function because their symptoms are so severe. But I wonder, does having a mental health condition affect one's ability to be able to experience the type of happiness that you've talked about?
Absolutely. So right now, the world is on sympathetic overdrive, which means our sympathetic nervous system is overactive because of stress, anxiety, pandemic, financial reasons, people losing jobs, and all that sympathetic overdrive creates inflammation in the body. It creates anxiety. For some people, it even creates guilt and shame, and of course, depression. And at this moment, every 40 seconds, somebody is dying from suicide. It's become the second most common cause of death amongst teenagers. And I'll tell you, Dr. Jess, it's because we've lost the ability to be playful, which is every child comes to this world playful. And there's no one playing these days. Okay, they call it games, which of course, when you call it a game, then the end point is to win, not to play. There's, when's the last time you saw a really good dancer and said, when is this dance going to finish? Or heard a really good song and wondering what's the ending of the song? Or watched a really joyful movie and wondering when it is going to end. It never happens because joyful experience is always in the present moment, and it's natural for us to have that. But right now, in a world where everybody's arguing about everything, where facts are confused with narratives and opinions, and everybody is living in fear, and everybody is canceling the other person. We live in what is called the cancel culture, and everybody is confusing their self with their selfies. Now we have a problem. When you sacrifice yourself with your selfie, then you have all this fear, anger, hostility, guilt, shame, depression, which also leads to chronic illness. So mental health, I would say, is the number one crisis in the world. We have a nonprofit, by the way, which is called Chopra Foundation. And we have a subsection of that called Never Alone. If anyone wants to check it out, www.neveralone.love, where we actually create communities for well-being, mental hygiene, suicide prevention, and now happiness.
People should certainly check it out. I think, I find that many people are struggling with that. And in my daily work and caring for people, that they're so isolated, and also to this point that you made about where we are with the state of things in the world, they're really struggling with that. Are there techniques or things that people could do to
Yes.
help?
Also, by the way, on my Audible series, with every speaker, I actually created a meditation on their topic. So people can look at the world as if for the first time. Unless we step out of the river of our conditioned mind and see the world fresh, like a baby, true happiness is impossible. Okay, so it's very important. Now, you mentioned other things people can do. Yes, reflective self-inquiry, mindfulness itself, awareness of the body, awareness of the breath, awareness of our mental stories, awareness of our internal dialogue, awareness of our images, awareness of our relationships, awareness of our connection to the bigger ecosystem. In other words, self-awareness is the only key, ultimately, to generate lasting happiness. And also there are physical things. If you do exercise, you will find that you make lots of dopamine and oxytocin. If you have a loving relationship, you make, all these happy hormones that actually trigger the happiness experience. It's not only dopamine, it's opiates, it's oxytocin, the love hormone, it's vagal stimulation, it is your diet. If your diet is pure and not manufactured, refined, processed, or has the chemicals, if you have maximum diversity of plant-based foods, and the meats you eat come from animal sources that are not factory farmed, you can change genetic information in your body. 80% of serotonin in the body comes from the gut. So when we stimulate the gut through either vagal stimulation, chanting, singing, dancing, ballet, mind-body coordination, tai chi, qigong, when we balance our biological rhythms by going out in nature, even touching a tree or walking barefoot on the earth, you restore circadian rhythms, bring down inflammation, and you start to feel happy. So there are physical interventions for mental distress, and then there are mental interventions for physical distress, because the reason we're calling this the mind-body zone is the mind and the body are one unified process in our awareness. There's no, in the deeper domain, there's no mind-body connection. The mind is the subjective experience of consciousness, and the body and the physical world is what we call the objective experience of consciousness. You can't have one without the other. Whatever happens in the mind is reflected in the body and vice versa. So interventions, mental, but also physical.
And these are things that people can do right away. I mean, we can
Absolutely.
all think about our diet, exercise. We can think about those connections that we have with people, even, in the world.
Just stopping and taking deep breath and smiling. By the way, there's all this interesting data that when you smile, and if you, the Buddhists have a practice where they smile from their head to their toes. They close their eyes and imagine that every part of their body is smiling. You can try anyone to do that, and suddenly their mood will change and their biology will change as well.
Wow, such powerful stuff. And it's inside each of us is what it sounds like.
Correct.
Well, it's been such a pleasure to talk with you and learn about happiness and an opportunity for something that we all can really engage with in our daily lives, and think about the lives of other people around us and how we can help them to achieve happiness or to help bring them up, especially people who have children.
Right. So, Dr. Jess, it's a great pleasure to talk to you. All the best on your Audible podcast, and invite others here who are listening to us to come to the Mind-Body Zone outside the box at Audible, and benefit from what we have to share, you and I.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Our world may look a little different right now, but the care team at Weill Cornell Medicine remains steadfast in caring for you.
I wanna feel the sunlight on my face.
Our digital health tools allow you to take control of your health wherever you are, so you can keep in touch with your physicians and stay up to date on important healthcare screenings and preventative care. It's time to prioritize you. Don't delay the care you need. Schedule today.
Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Chidi Parikh, the Executive Director of Integrative Health and Wellbeing at Weill Cornell Medicine, New York Presbyterian Hospital. I'm so excited to talk about my favorite topic, food as medicine. There's an ancient Ayurvedic proverb that says, if diet is wrong, medicine is of no use, and if diet is correct, medicine is of no need. That is particularly true when it comes to mental health. Most people think of diet as something you focus on when you're trying to lose some weight or treating conditions such as obesity or diabetes, but we often don't think about food as having much to do when it comes to our brain health or our mood. Well, nothing could be further from the truth. There is a tremendous amount of research that has shown a direct link between what we eat and how we feel. In fact, our diet is our main ally in not only treating conditions such as depression, anxiety, but also preventing them in the first place. And we all know that prevention is always better than the cure. So no wonder that there is a whole new field called nutritional psychiatry that is entirely focused on this topic. Based on all the latest research that has come out, and especially in the last decade or so, the Academy of Nutritional Psychiatry has put together their top 5 diet recommendations that I would love to share with you. Number 1 recommendation, following a traditional diet pattern, such as Mediterranean, Norwegian, Japanese. So what do these traditional diets have in common? One main thing is they tend to be full of natural whole foods and much less on the processed foods. So when you encourage diets that are more natural, that include a lots of fruits, vegetables, whole foods, they tend to lower inflammation. Versus our standard American diet, or what I like to call it as sad diet or very sad diet, unfortunately is full of processed foods that cause increased amounts of inflammation. That's the reason why diets such as Mediterranean diet are really the ideal diet for us, especially given our climate. And also they're much easier to follow because most of those foods eaten in the Mediterranean climate are easily available in our local grocery stores. The recent research on Mediterranean diet says that it's effective in not only helping us prevent different conditions such as heart disease, cancers, but even things like Alzheimer's. So to summarize, traditional diet patterns such as Mediterranean diet tend to be very anti-inflammatory, and research has shown that they are very helpful in preventing many conditions and optimizing our brain health and even our heart health. So the next recommendation, that one focuses on increasing consumption of fruits, vegetables, legumes, whole grains, nuts, and seeds. Again, all of these foods tend to be one of the main components of diets such as the Mediterranean diet. So this comes as no surprise. So again, one thing common with all of these foods is that they are plant-based. They're made by Mother Nature, not by a factory. Because they're plant-based, they're also extremely rich in fiber. So fiber tends to be the unsung hero when it comes to the nutrition story. And we'll talk more about that. But besides being high in fiber, another thing all of these food groups have in common is they're very high in one particular vitamin called folate, or folic acid as you might know it. This particular B vitamin has been very much linked with symptoms of depression. Researchers have found that people who are already on antidepressants but often don't respond well tend to have very low folate levels in the fluid surrounding their brain and in their blood. So treatment with high dose folate, especially methylfolate, is very beneficial in treating depression, especially treatment-resistant depression. So to summarize, increased consumptions for fruits, vegetables, legumes, whole grains, nuts, and seeds are very important because they're high in fiber, but they're also very high in important vitamins such as folate. The third one on the list, increasing the consumption of omega-rich fatty acids. Our brain is made up of fat, so no surprise there that we need healthy fats in our diet, especially the omega-3 fatty acids. The reason why they're such good fats is because they fight inflammation. And we know that inflammation is often the root cause of so many diseases that we see these days, especially linked to mental health. That is the reason why increasing the amount of omega-3 fats helps us reduce inflammation in our brain and in our body. And great sources of omega-3 fats tend to be fatty fish, especially smaller fish such as sardines, mackerel, and even salmon. But don't worry, if eating fish is not your cup of tea, don't worry, there are other options such as flax seeds, chia seeds, and walnuts. Simply including a teaspoon of flax seeds in your morning smoothie, or making a chia seed pudding, or just eating 4 or 5 walnuts a day can easily give you your omega-3 fix for the day. So to summarize, the omega-3 fats are very important for brain health because they fight inflammation in the brain and in the body. And they are really great sources, which include fatty fish, but also plant-based options such as flax seeds, chia seeds, and walnuts. So make sure you get your daily dose of omega-3 fatty acids. The fourth one, very important one, is limiting the intake of processed foods, fast foods, commercially baked goods, and sweets. So what is it about processed foods that is so bad for us? The reason why processed foods are bad is because, again, they increase inflammation. And there are 3 specific ingredients that I always bring up with my patients when I'm taking a closer look at their diet. These 3 ingredients tend to be high fructose corn syrup, trans fats, artificial food colors, and also preservatives. Especially certain types of food colors and preservatives. A recent study in England actually they found that artificial colors and one particular preservative called sodium benzoate was actually associated with significantly increased hyperactivity in children. Not only children, but I've seen many other studies that say that artificial colors can increase ADHD type of symptoms even in adults. So after the study was published along many others that show the same thing, the EU actually decided to put a warning label on any foods that have these ingredients. Not only that, there are many artificial colors that are used commonly in foods in America are actually banned in Europe. For instance, M&Ms in Europe are colored with natural colors, but in America, they're colored using artificial ingredients. So this is a particularly important topic when it comes to addressing symptoms of ADHD, whether it's in children or adults. So please make sure that you're significantly reducing your consumption of processed foods, fast foods that have these 3 ingredients that significantly increase inflammation. Next one on the list, the last one, but definitely not the least, being mindful of your gut bacteria. So you must be wondering, what on earth do bacteria in the gut have anything to do with my brain? Well, it turns out that 90% of serotonin, the happy hormone, is actually made in the gut by these trillions of bacteria. And we know that low levels of serotonin play a significant role in symptoms of depression and anxiety. And that is the reason that most of the medications we use nowadays to treat depression or anxiety tend to be a group of medications called SSRIs. And the way they work is by increasing the amount of serotonin in the brain. Like I mentioned, that's only 10% of the picture. So what about the other 90% of serotonin that is made in the gut? Shouldn't we be paying more attention to it? Absolutely. And that's what a lot of recent research studies have come out to prove, that we have to pay attention to these gut bacteria, and they play a much bigger role in our mental health than we previously imagined. So scientists are working to figure out which particular strains of probiotic or good bacteria play a role in a variety of mental health conditions, whether it's depression or anxiety. And they've also found that when someone has more inflammatory or bad bacteria, they tend to have a negative impact on mood and even our cognition. One interesting study I came across recently was a study that took bacteria from depressed human beings and transferred them into mice. And they found that the mice started developing symptoms of depression. Now, don't ask me how you know if a mouse is depressed, but it's fascinating to think that these bacteria in the gut are causing depression. And when you transfer them into another organism, you still have that effect of depression sort of living on. This is just the beginning. There was another study that was really well received recently, was looking at addressing symptoms of anxiety and depression postpartum. And this study gave new moms probiotics for 6 months postpartum. And they found that the probiotic therapy significantly reduced the incidence of postpartum depression and anxiety. And most of these studies that are done looking to treat depression with probiotics are usually done with a variety of different probiotics or bacteria that are often in the family of bacteria called lactobacillus or bifidobacterium. You might have heard lactobacillus because that is commonly found in fermented foods or things like yogurt. So as you can see, that probiotic therapy holds a lot of promise in optimizing mental health. So not only do these good bacteria play a role in depression and anxiety, they can even affect our personality. So this very interesting study out of Korea looked at association between personality traits and the type of bacteria that live in our gut. What they found was certain bad bacteria that found in the gut led to more neurotic and less conscientious type of personality in human beings. This is just the beginning. There's another study out of Oxford that found that people who tend to be more sociable, the life of the party type of people, they tend to have a very diverse gut microbiome with different types of bacteria. So it sounds like a very diverse amount of bacteria in our gut is really the key to happiness, right? So how do we make that happen? Well, when I talk about probiotic and the promise it holds, the first question my patients ask me is, Doc, just tell me which probiotic to take and I'll take it. I wish it was that simple. We have the tendency to try to treat everything with a pill, but it's not always that straightforward, especially not when it comes to probiotics, because there's a difference between medications or vitamins or supplements and probiotics, because these are not chemicals. These are living, breathing organisms, right? So I can take a probiotic and it will certainly do me good to have extra load of good bacteria in my gut. But that is only half of the story. Because in order to reap the full benefits of having these good bacteria, we have to make sure they actually survive in the gut and they continue to grow and proliferate over time. These bacteria are like guests in our house. We have to treat them well. And first of all, we have to feed them. Turns out the good bacteria in our gut love to eat fiber. That is why a diet that is full of fruits, vegetables, whole grain, legumes, nuts, and seeds sounds familiar, right? This tends to be so good for us because it is very high in fiber and that feeds the good bacteria in the gut. So it's always good to take probiotics, but don't forget the other half of the story. A diet that is full of fiber, diverse fiber, is going to continue to feed the good bacteria that you're taking in. We often focus on proteins, fats, and carbs in our diet. I encourage you to think about probiotic-rich foods, prebiotic-rich foods, which basically means fiber-rich foods, and make sure that they become a permanent part of your diet. So let me summarize. The 3 things that I always focus on when I see my patients when we're focusing on optimizing mental health and brain health. First thing, food is medicine. So I take a very close look at their diet. And we start by shifting our diet to more of a plant-based or a pescatarian type of diet that is very high in fiber and includes a lot of diversity when it comes to fruits, vegetables, whole grains, nuts, and seeds on a regular basis, and heart-healthy fats and brain-healthy fats, such as omega-3s that can come from nuts or seeds or healthy fish. The second thing I do is do a blood test to look at the levels of certain vitamins that we talked about are important, such as folate, but I also look at something like B12 and vitamin D. Another thing we talked about is levels of inflammation. So I check inflammation markers in the blood, such as C-reactive protein or homocysteine, and I will even check omega-3 levels in the blood. That information helps me guide the diet and customize it to each patient that I see, and if they need any supplements, to figure out the right dose and type of supplements they would benefit from. And last but not least, there are times for some patients, I will actually do a gut microbiome test. What that entails is looking at the stool to understand what type of bacteria are in someone's gut. How many of the good guys do you have and how many of the bad ones? And by addressing that balance and harmony between good and bad bacteria, we can certainly optimize brain health. And as the research is showing, that focusing on gut health through optimizing our diet is really the key to optimizing our brain health and mental health. I hope this information was helpful. Thank you so much for your time.
Welcome to the Happiness Summit panel on building resilience. My name is James Pawelski, and I'm a professor at the University of Pennsylvania, where I direct the Master of Applied Positive Psychology program and the Humanities and Human Flourishing project. Every person who has ever pursued happiness has encountered significant and ongoing obstacles. As the poet Henry Wadsworth Longfellow put it, into each life, some rain must fall. No one gets to live their life without rainy days, and even stormy ones. But how we respond to the adversity in our lives makes a huge difference. Do we allow the rain to flood our souls with despair? Or do we find a way to use the water it brings to grow and perhaps to flourish? Resilience is a key to surviving and even thriving in adverse circumstances. But how do we build resilience? Are there specific skills we can learn and practice to cultivate resilience in our lives? Here to discuss specific strategies for building resilience based on scientific research are three experts who have devoted their lives to studying resilience and helping people develop it. I'd like to begin with Dr. Dilip Jastay, a dean and distinguished professor of psychiatry and neurosciences at the University of California, San Diego. Welcome, Dilip.
Thank you.
In 2012, you became president of the American Psychiatric Association. You took as the theme of your presidency, positive psychiatry, and you subsequently edited a volume with that title. But isn't that an oxymoron? What is positive psychiatry?
Thank you, James. First of all, I want to thank the organizers of this session for inviting me. It's really a pleasure. Positive psychiatry was inspired by positive psychology. And as we all know, Marty Seligman is the father of modern positive psychology. And James, your own work on eudaimonic well-being and flourishing contributed importantly. The thing I admire most is that positive psychology has become a part of the lexicon for common person. Unfortunately, medicine, including psychiatry, have traditionally focused almost exclusively on diseases and disabilities. That is understandable to some extent because people come to us with some diseases, so we need to diagnose and treat them. But as you said, when I became president, I realized that we really need to do more than that. We should not be experts only in mental illnesses. We should also be experts in mental health. And mental health applies to everybody, including people with mental illnesses. So that's the time when we started this positive psychiatry, and Samantha Boardman, who is here, was one of my partners in crime. We published the first paper on positive psychiatry. So we defined positive psychiatry as a part of psychiatry that focuses on studying and promoting well-being through enhancement of positive psychosocial traits such as resilience, optimism, compassion, wisdom, social engagement, and so on. And this is something that applies even to people with serious mental illnesses. I study schizophrenia and aging. And we find even in this group, people have resilience, optimism, wisdom. Not only that, but these traits are associated with better health. Not only better mental health, but better physical health, even better biomarkers. For example, one of our studies found that resilience in people with schizophrenia was associated with better metabolic functioning, better fasting blood glucose level, better hemoglobin A1C, and so on. Similarly, positive psychology or psychiatry interventions can have impact on the brain. The white matter integrity increases. So that's the goal of positive psychiatry, is to bring those principles of positive psychology into psychiatry, including the people with serious mental illnesses. And this is a movement that has started. It is taking shape. It has long ways to go, but I'm really delighted that it is moving surely and steadily.
What important work, Dilip. Thank you for your leadership on that. Now, last year, you published another book. You published a book called Wiser, The Scientific Roots of Wisdom, Compassion, and What Makes Us Good. As a philosopher, I was particularly interested in your scientific approach to wisdom. Now, although we don't have time to go into your work fully today, you suggest that we can become wiser faster than people in the past. What do you mean by that? And what is one thing we can do to become wiser faster?
Thank you. Wisdom is a personality trait with specific components. These components include pro-social behaviors like empathy and compassion, self-reflection, emotional regulation, acceptance of diverse perspectives, social advising, and spirituality. Of these, the single most important component is pro-social behavior, things that we do for other people. And that includes empathy and compassion. Empathy means understanding and sharing somebody else's emotions or thoughts. Compassion means acting on it and helping other people. So the most important strategy I would suggest for becoming wiser is to improve our empathy and compassion. And there are different ways of doing that, but there are three things I stress. One is gratitude diary. Second is volunteering. And third is meeting with people who are different. So, gratitude diary. Before going to bed, write a couple of things that made you feel grateful because some strangers helped you for no reason. But also write a couple of things that you feel good about yourself because you helped others when you didn't have any selfish motive in that. When we do that regularly, we start the next day thinking about what we are going to write. And so that changes our behavior. That becomes our second nature. And you don't necessarily need to write this. You can talk to somebody about that. That's okay too. The second is volunteering. Let us set aside a few hours a week for helping people who need help, whether it is older people with dementia in nursing home, or if the children with autism spectrum disorder or other disabilities. Let us spend some time, help them, that makes them feel good, and it makes us feel good about ourselves. And thirdly, meeting with people who are different in the color of skin, sex, but also different perspectives and value systems. I think one of the big problems today in our society is polarization. We just don't dislike each other. We hate one another. That must change because it affects our health. And the way to handle that is setting aside times very regularly to meet with people who have different perspectives. Let us understand why their perspectives are different. We don't have to agree with them. We can continue to disagree. But at least by understanding them, we'll have more respect for their perspective. And that will reduce the polarization and make us wiser.
Thank you, Dilip. Those are great and very practical suggestions. I'd like to turn now to Dr. Samantha Boardman, Clinical Assistant Professor of Psychiatry at Weill Cornell Medical College. Welcome, Samantha.
Thank you, James. It's really an honor to be here and part of this Resilience Dream Team.
So, Samantha, your work integrates positive psychology and positive psychiatry. You're a graduate of the Master of Applied Positive Psychology program at the University of Pennsylvania, and you're a practicing psychiatrist. You wrote, as Dilip mentioned, you've written with him works on positive psychiatry. And earlier this year, you published a book called Everyday Vitality, Turning Stress into Strength. Now, in your book, you claim that happiness does not come from eliminating all the stresses and worries in our lives, or even just learning to live with them. Your message is that we should cultivate what you call everyday vitality. What do you mean by that?
Well, vitality is not a word I heard in medical school or even in psychiatry residency, but it's really that sense of aliveness and energy that I think is at the very core of well-being and everyday well-being. It's what helps us not just manage the hassles, but also find uplifts in our everyday life. And it's been said that the opposite of depression isn't happiness, it is vitality. So it's not, only can we get rid of what's hard in our lives, how do we enhance this feeling of energy and sort of positive aliveness? And that's really what my book is about.
And Samantha, oftentimes we think about, going to a psychiatrist if you have a major, trauma, something really big from your past or that you're dealing with. And that's, of course, important. But in your work, you talk about the everyday nature of this. So it's not just the big things that drag us down, but it's the small things. And then conversely, it's not just holding out for that life transforming, big thing that comes along once in a grand while, but it's about the everyday things in life, right?
Exactly. And I think sometimes in psychiatry, we'll think, oh, well, if I only had this insight or I kind of figured this out or this understanding. And I think that's insight imperialism. It's actually, how are we connecting with others? How are we participating with others? What are the actions we're actually taking? What is our embodied path to vitality? And I really like to break it down into three simple ways to think about cultivating more vitality in your everyday life. And that I think of it as the 3 C's. The first is your connections. How are you connecting meaningfully with others, having positive interactions? You're enhancing your high quality relationships with others. It might be as simple as putting your phone down, giving somebody your full attention, saying, tell me more when someone shares a story. And not even just your loved ones. It could be with colleagues, coworkers, a stranger. The second C is, how are you challenging yourself in a positive way? Are you learning something? You expanding, to echo what Dr. Jeste says? Are you speaking with somebody who maybe doesn't share your point of view? Those moments where you're feeling like you're expanding beyond yourself. And the third C is, how are you contributing to something beyond yourself that you feel like you're adding value? There's a great deal of emphasis on self-care, but it's actually an other care that is a more reliable source of our well-being. So what are the ways that in every day that you are contributing, connecting, and challenging yourself? And I think those are well springs of vitality, and they can help you build this everyday resilience, not just the big R resilience, which is how we respond to those major life events, but to those little things, those micro stressors, those hassles, and how are we embedding uplifts in our everyday life to counter those hassles and provide a buffer, but also to bolster our mental health.
So Samantha, you use a metaphor in your book connected to eating, right? So we can think about well-being as kind of like, it would be silly, wouldn't it, to say like, all I want in life is just one good meal. And when I have that one fabulous meal, I'm never going to have to eat again. Like, it might generate some good memories, but you're still going to have to eat and keep nutrition in your body. Now, you talk about what you call empty calories, or I love this phrase, cotton candy for the soul. So many of us go about trying to find this vitality in ways that just aren't so helpful. And you recommend scientific, evidence-based ways of actually getting the nutrition that we need for our well-being.
Yes, well, it's sort of junk food that we often turn to. And I think when we're overwhelmed and stressed out in our everyday lives, we'll turn to sometimes unhealthy coping strategies. It's when we cancel our plans with friends, we will skip going to the gym, we will reach for that bucket of ice cream. And so, how can we override that? What are the ways we can build into our everyday lives, ways that we can choose vitality enhancing strategies? I think Dr. Milkman might have a lot to say about that as well. But so how do we get rid of this junk food and what I call vampires of vitality? It's having, reaching for your phone, binge watching TV when you feel like a guilty couch potato, because it's often in these effortful activities. And this sounds so counterintuitive. It's when we're engaging in a hobby where we lose sense of time, where we have flow, that we actually have that life enhancing moment in the day. And this creates a buffer and helps us manage the hassles. It's the same with taking that moment to have a conversation with your barista when you're buying your coffee, or speaking to somebody as you're walking, your dog down the street, or having a nice connection with a loved one. It's when we're even picking up that piece of garbage we've seen on the street. And I think with a lot of the emphasis right now on self-care, it's as though you have to change your life radically, or you have to eat, pray, love your way to happiness or everyday resilience. But I'm really interested in these little micro moments in your everyday way that you can not just sort of seek vitality, but cultivate vitality. And it's usually other oriented and it's outer oriented. And there's, a way to think, I think there's so much pressure on all of us right now that we have to find ourselves. And it's actually all, I think, a process. We're all in the process of becoming, and we're all changing constantly. And how can we change in the direction that we'd like to be changing? And I think there are everyday ways to connect, to challenge, and to contribute that we can, sort of at least move in the direction we'd like to be going.
I really like that distinction between finding yourself and becoming yourself. So let's turn to our final expert, Katie Milkman. She is the James G. Deanan Professor and co-founder of the Behavior Change for Good initiative in the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania. Welcome, Katie.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be here.
Katie, you've just published a book called How to Change: The Science of Getting from Where You Are to Where You Want to Be. In your book, you point out how crucial it is to be aware of the obstacles to change so we can work strategically to overcome them. In particular, you focus on the inner obstacles we all face, things like impulsivity, forgetfulness, laziness, and a tendency to procrastinate. And I must say, I think you know me pretty well. Can you describe one of those obstacles in a little more detail, and one way in which your research indicates we can work to overcome it?
Yeah, I'd love to. And I actually want to start with impulsivity, which is probably my biggest problem, and one that I think most people can relate to some degree. And that is really driven by our tendency to focus more attention on instant gratification, instant rewards, and less on future long-term rewards. It can help explain why so many of us don't save enough for retirement, why so many of us eat unhealthy foods when we know we should eat healthy ones, or don't exercise and sit on the couch when we realize that's really not the best thing for us to be doing. So it gets in the way of us achieving many of our goals. And I think one of the most fascinating findings of the last several decades in behavioral science is that the key to overcoming this, or a key to overcoming this barrier, is not the one we normally think of. We normally think, most of us think, we should just try to find the most effective way to achieve our goals and push through whatever is difficult and not instantly gratifying, right? So if you don't enjoy going to the gym, just do it, as Nike says. Go anyway, push yourself, take the most efficient route to getting in shape, get on the maximally punishing Stairmaster, and you'll be able to make it work. But what research by Ayelet Fishbach of the University of Chicago and Caitlin Woolley of Cornell University shows is actually we do better at persisting and achieving our long-term goals when we focus on finding a path to achieving them that's actually instantly gratifying, that we enjoy in the moment. So if you're thinking about exercise, for instance, a better way to get to your long-run goal of being fit would actually be to choose a workout maybe that burns slightly fewer calories per minute, but that you really enjoy, like going to a Zumba class with a friend. And I've done some research on a specific way we can make it fun to achieve our goals. And that is by doing something I call temptation bundling, which is linking something that you love, that you look forward to, a temptation, with something that would otherwise feel like a chore. So the chore is converted into a source of pleasure. So to stick with the exercise domain, I've studied this in that context. You can only let yourself binge watch your favorite TV shows while you're exercising at the gym. And suddenly you may find that you start craving those trips and that time flies while you're there, and you get rid of guilt around watching too many episodes of the Kardashians. But you can do this in other parts of your life too. Save a favorite podcast to listen to while you're doing household chores, and suddenly those chores the time will pass quickly while you're doing them. Or only open your favorite bottle of wine when cooking a fresh meal for your family, or save a treat that you really enjoy eating for when you're hitting the books at the library. I often suggest that one to my students. So that's a tactic that I think can be particularly useful in the face of impulsivity and make life more fun.
I love that. It reminds me of William James's quotation that the great thing in all education is to make our nervous system our ally instead of our enemy. So many of us are fighting against ourselves in ways that are just not productive. And what you're suggesting is a strategic way of collaborating with ourselves. Now, Katie, I think one of the things that you emphasize in your book is that this work is not like an appendectomy. Like if you have appendicitis, you go in, you get your appendix taken out, you are good for the rest of your life. You're fine. But yeah, right. But this is more an ongoing kind of practice. Is that right?
Absolutely. I think one of the most important things that I have seen in the work I've done about behavior change and what it takes is that too often we're looking for sort of the shiny solution that we deploy for a month and that magically carries us forward to change and transform our lives forever after, with just a little bit of investment. And what instead seems to be the case, at least in the work I've done and the work I've read in this topic, is that it's a much longer process, that once we find solutions to those internal barriers that can hold us back from achieving our goals, we need to keep applying them in our lives. So for instance, if you find a way to make exercise fun by temptation bundling for a month, you can't just stop doing it and expect for the rest of your life you'll have a workout habit because now you invested a little time in building one. Instead, what you need to do is keep making it fun to exercise, and then you're going to persist in achieving your goals. And of course, sometimes the barriers to change can shift over time, and then we need to find new solutions that, maybe it used to be that you weren't able to exercise because you hated it, and now life has gotten overcrowded and you have to figure out ways to plan and schedule and remind yourself. So the barriers can change, and we need to have a long-term focus when we're thinking about change rather than a short, quick fix approach.
What a great distinction. And I'm just thinking about the themes that are coming out from what each of you have said. So I'll say, what I've not heard is anyone saying, well, to have happiness, you have to get rid of all bad things in your life. You have to have everything has to be just so. Otherwise, you can't be happy or you can't be resilient. What I have heard is that just doing whatever comes naturally may not be the right way to developing resilience. What I've also heard, though, is that there are specific ways in which we can manage our focus and attention. Oh, one other thing I've not heard is that you just kind of grit and get through it, and just kind of, you can manage it. But rather, it's about being wise about how we direct our efforts in ways that scientific research has indicated that these might be especially fruitful ways of moving forward, and that this is an ongoing, lifelong process that we need to engage in. And maybe finally, that this isn't just about going deep inside and finding happiness within. It's about becoming, it's about connecting, it's about being with others. So as we wrap up, I'm just curious if each one of you would leave us with one thought that you have for all of us as we engage in this ongoing process of building resilience. Dilip, let's start with you.
One thing I would suggest is what I call positive solitude, that we all need to set aside some time when we are by ourselves, use that time to think about what we did in the last several days that made us feel happy versus what made us feel stressed out. We'll find out a certain pattern will emerge. We can find out the things that come in our way and some that help us. Once we think about that, then the next step would be self-improvement. But that would depend on honest, unbiased self-reflection. That is critical, and that can only happen if we devote that time in a way that we understand ourselves and improve ourselves.
Dilip, that's so important, especially these days where we have all of these temptations for not spending quality time. I've got 30 seconds. Let me go and check Instagram, or let me go and check something else. And having that time where we're able to be aware of ourselves, I think, is really, really crucial. Thank you. Samantha, let's turn to you.
I would recommend being deliberate about resilience, and especially being deliberate about seeking delight in your everyday life. And rather than focusing on what's the matter, focusing on what matters. I think when we embody our values and there's overlap between what we care deeply about and our actions, we're much more likely to find that everyday resilience.
Thank you, Samantha. Katie, what would you say?
I think my one piece of advice is to recognize that, of course, there will be some highs and lows in life. And that when you want to make a change in a positive direction, a really big opportunity can come at a fresh start moment. And this is something that I've studied with collaborators, showing that there are these moments that occur with regularity in our lives that make us feel like we have a clean slate or a fresh start or a new beginning. And they can be dates you can think of, like New Year's, but they can be more mundane dates as well, from the start of a new week or a new month to the celebration of a birthday or a holiday that you associate with new beginnings. And when those moments arise, they make us feel dissociated from our past failures and more optimistic about what we can accomplish. And they lead us to pursue our goals with renewed vigor. And so I would say, look for those fresh start moments in your life and try to create them if you need to, when you're in a rut and when you have something big that you want to achieve, so that you can motivate yourself to start moving in that positive direction.
I love that. I love that. Oh, thank you so much, Dilip, Samantha, Katie, for these wonderful perspectives and practical recommendations for actively building resilience, for developing everyday vitality, for getting where we want to go in our lives, and even for becoming wiser. Thanks to the 92nd Street Y for organizing this happiness summit, and to everyone who has joined us today. We wish you well as you continue to build resilience in your own life, and in so doing, contribute to better relationships, stronger communities, and a healthier society.
Hello, everybody. My name is Liz Plasser. I am the editor-in-chief of Women's Health, and I am super excited to be speaking to all of you today about one of my favorite topics, which is owning your morning. In fact, I love it so much, I just released a book all about it. So I want to start by telling you a quick story, which is the story of my morning. And I did what I always do, which is wake up at 5:17 a.m. And I'll get into that in just a second. But next, I had some coffee, also a regular part of my morning. I did some journaling, some meditation, which we'll also get into. And then I hit the YMCA for a quick workout. So that is my morning routine in a nutshell. Those are sort of my non-negotiables. And then the rest of the day began. I took my kids to the bus stop. My 10-year-olds got into an argument on the way. The bus was late. Finally got them on it. Rushed home to get my youngest son to his school. While I was walking him, I checked my work email. There was an urgent thing to deal with that I had not expected or planned for. So I share this story because despite our best laid plans, life gets in the way. And what I really believe is that the difference between a good morning and a great morning is if you start it by taking care of yourself and filling yourself up with the things that matter most to you, then you are so much better equipped for all the twists and turns that will indeed happen, whether it's later that morning or later that day. And that's really what this book is all about. Own Your Morning has been a passion project of mine and of women's health for many years. And the reason we are on a mission to help make mornings more magical is because we know how much science and research there is supporting the idea that how you start your day is indeed how you live your day. So my book really wants you to be the architect of your perfect morning, whatever that looks like for you. I'm really here to help you live your healthiest, happiest life starting at sunrise, but that is going to look beautifully different and unique for every single one of us. And I hope you will go on that journey by reading the book and figuring out what matters most to you, and then building little micro moments that nod to those things into your morning. So for me, as I mentioned, that begins at 5:17 a.m. Why, you might be wondering, do I set my alarm for 5:17? And although this brand and this book is all about experts and science and the latest research, this is the one tip that I have not yet found a study to support, but I stand by it, that if you can begin your morning with a number that really lights you up and makes you happy, then that is some great energy you are going to take into the rest of the day. 7 is my lucky number. So personally, I like starting my day with a 7, but it could be 3, it could be 8, it could be whatever number is meaningful to you. Second, I believe that by setting my alarm for an odd number, I'm much less likely to press the snooze button. Something about landing on 6 a.m. or 6:30 a.m. or whatever it is, I'm more likely to press that snooze button and try to get a few more minutes of sleep. And interestingly, all the sleep experts I talked to were very anti-snooze button. And the reason they told me that they prefer people don't press snooze is because at the end of your sleep cycle, you're in a phase called REM sleep, which is the most restorative, important part. And so if you're pressing snooze then and sort of having those turbulent, interrupted intervals, then you're not getting all you can out of that very precious final bit of sleep at the end of the night. So back into when you absolutely have to wake up, pick a number that matters to you, and for extra credit, choose an alarm sound that makes you happy. I personally love the chime sound on my phone. Anything except that loud, blaring alarm sound, I think will work. So that's how I begin my morning. Second, as I mentioned, I started my morning with some journaling and meditation. This is a great place to set your intention for the day, to reflect on what you want to accomplish. For me, it means writing a gratitude list. I also choose a few words that I want to bring to life that day, adjectives. And that looks a little different for me every day, but it helps me get really clear on what energy I want to project with my family, with my friends, and with my colleagues that day. So I learned from experts in reporting this book that meditation and journaling can take all different forms. I have tried many times to become, get into the Zen Buddha position, which is awesome if that works for you. But for me, meditation is more about putting on my headphones, going to a quiet place, and listening to the music that I need that day. So after that, I would also say fitness is a huge part of my morning. And I want to be really clear that although I love fitness, and that often means, swinging kettlebells and banging out some pull-ups, just moving your body is awesome. That could be as simple as taking a walk around your block. Maybe you have a dog or a pet that you want to spend time with and get some exercise with, or maybe you want to meet a friend and go for a jog. The benefits of exercise are just unfathomable, and it's everything from helping your heart's health, your bone density, to the more nebulous emotional and mental benefits like making you feel a sense of confidence, making you feel more calm. I know that I always say I feel so clear-eyed and sparkly after a workout. And there is tons of science suggesting that that's not just me feeling it. That is an actual magical change in my body chemistry that's happening when I'm doing some physical exertion. So exercise is great. And for a little bit of extra credit, it would be wonderful if you could go outside for just a bit and expose yourself to some sunlight. I know that's getting harder as the days are getting shorter this winter, but again, the research about getting yourself some light, there's tons of it. It actually reduces your melatonin levels. So that makes you just naturally feel more alert and boosts your mood. And if it is difficult for you to get sunlight at the crack of dawn, which I can understand, the next best thing is to turn on a bright light in your apartment. I also share in my book that making connections with people is an important part of my morning. And again, there are really quick, simple, but powerful and effective ways you can do that. For me, it means sending a couple of text messages to people who are important to me in my life. I'm not suggesting that you call your mom or your sister or your best friend and have an hour-long marathon catch-up session, though I'm sure they would all love that at some point. It can be as simple as shooting a text to somebody with a heart emoji that says, I love you and I'm thinking about you. Not only scientifically is shown to make you feel good when you put that karma and energy out in the world, but it will make the recipient feel really, really amazing too. So those are a few things that I like to do every single morning. They make me feel my best. And whenever those twists and turns happen, like my kids getting in a little bit of a thing this morning, or the bus arriving late, or a rainy morning, or that last minute deadline that you didn't expect, I find that I am so much better prepared to handle those obstacles and those hard things and challenges, and to really stand up and meet them head on, feeling my very, very best. So I hope that you too can find what fills you up and lights you up with your morning, so you feel like your healthiest and happiest self. And I would be so psyched if you would share some of those wins and even those challenges by using the hashtag #OwnYourMorning. And finally, before I leave you all, I want to say a very special thank you to our friends at Say Your Piece, which is an organization that is very aligned with my mission to share more of yourself and to really come together through the challenges that we're all facing in the world today. So thank you so much for having me, and I look forward to seeing how you own your morning.
Hello, I am Nina Garcia. I am the editor-in-chief of Elle Magazine, and I am also a judge on Project One Way. It is such a pleasure to be here. I am thrilled to be part of the Happiness Summit with my dear friend and colleague, Michael Clinton.
Thank you, Nina, and I'm thrilled to be here as well. And congratulations on 19 seasons of Project One Way. It's an amazing milestone, and it's always a happy day when I'm with Nina Garcia. So
oh my God, Michael, you are so incredible. I like to say that you are not only a colleague, but you are a mentor. For those who don't know Michael, I do have to say this: you are an incredible, inspirational person, because you are accomplished at so many things. You are a pilot, you are an author of 10 books, 11 with this one. You've done marathons around the 7 continents. You're a pilot. You are really someone who, if I have a problem, this is the person I go for advice. So I am so happy to be speaking with you today, Michael. There's so much to discuss. Let's dig right in, because I want the audience to really hear so much about this book, which is so important. This summit is about happiness, and I think this book is perfect. Tell us a little bit, Michael, about your background, which I kind of did, but you will go into detail. And why did you decide to write this book?
well, thank you, Nina. I think one of the things that I learned is that if you're in midlife at 50 plus, the construct that we were all handed is all becoming completely irrelevant. Because if you're 50 plus and you're healthy, you have a good shot of living to be 90. So you can begin a whole new chapter in a new career, a new lifestyle, a new relationship. And one of the things that I learned is that, oftentimes people, when they're in their 50s or 60s, they get stuck, they get frozen, they don't know, how to move forward because they're sort of been living in this idea that you have to wind down. And I would argue that you have to wind up because there's so much possibility that can bring you satisfaction and bring you fulfillment. And I think those are the things that lead to happiness ultimately. So I wanted to write a book on this topic and shine a light on this approach.
Can we talk a little bit more about happiness? Because I know that your book goes into detail about, there is a formula, the Michael Clinton formula on happiness. Would you share that with us? Because I think that's such a great nugget of information from the book. And it's a really philosophy to have in life.
No, thank you. First of all, I'm going to use those words, fulfilled and satisfied again, because those are the things that lead to one state of happiness. And of course, we all know that happiness is a fluid state. It's not a sustained state. And there are peaks and there are valleys. But as human beings, we find the things that satisfy and fulfill us. I interviewed 40 individuals, amazing inspirational stories. And the book tells their story about how they found their road to happiness and satisfaction in midlife. A book editor who at 53 decided to become a doctor, which was quite an amazing journey. And she is now a doctor in her 60s. All sorts of stories that talk about that, but also a lot of tools and resources in the book. We also did a survey, we did a study to really probe people about what brings them satisfaction and or happiness and how they find ways to move forward in their lives. So the book's a combination of inspiration and tools and resources for the reader.
Michael, going back to how people become frozen and paralyzing, change is a very scary word. And it could be very scary for someone that has been in a successful job for a very long time, right? And all of a sudden, you've done it for many years. How do we know, what is that aha moment when you know that you have to make a change? And why do we become paralyzed with the idea of change? Why is it so scary?
Well, first of all,
and it's overwhelming, to be honest with you. It can be scary and overwhelming.
First of all, I mean, Nina, as you know, I was proud to be on the team that launched Oprah's magazine, and it's been, over 20 years now. And Oprah always said in our meetings when we would talk about this, there's that little voice in the back of your head, and it starts getting louder and louder and louder. And you have to listen to that little voice because that's how you're being true to yourself. So that is the first thing when you're acknowledging that something is not right and you need to make a change, right? And part of that, if you're leaving a career after 25, 30, 35 years, and it's time because you sort of, arced out, many people will say, well, I'll figure it out when I get there. And, that's not a good solution because that's what creates fear and that's what creates being frozen. So I always like to say, begin a parallel life, start building out what the new you is going to be. Because if you define yourself by your professional chair, you will be stuck and you will be lost. You have to build identities for yourself that are multifaceted so that when you do step out of a professional chair or you step out of the chair of being a mother or a father and you've just raised kids and the kids are now gone. There's a great story in the book about a woman who said, I had to move out of my mom's skin. I had to become a different person, and she started building that persona. So it can be in your personal life or your professional life where you can start to build this parallel life to move you through the change process. And there are a lot of good steps that we captured in these interviews that help you get there.
I mean, to be honest with you, it is such a timely book because given the pandemic, I think a lot of people at home have been thinking, well, I don't want that job. I want to move. I want the freedom. It's a book that is really, it's a timely book at any time of your life, really. And it gives you, again, it's the Michael Clinton's secret formula of what are the steps to take to make those changes. You talk a lot about courage in this book, and it's something that comes up quite a lot, and it's something that I know that you have a great deal of. You also share a lot of your family history and your background. Will you give us a little bit of that, because it's a really incredible story, and I'd love the audience to know a little bit more about that.
No, thanks. I mean, I came from a very poor working class family in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. 6 children, not a lot of money on all those things. But I knew from an early age, and there was no education in the family history. I was the first to go to college, and I knew that, this was my path to find a way. And like many, many young people, I came to New York with $60 in my pocket and a couch to sleep on, and a dream
to be to be the youngest, most successful publisher, by the way.
that happened. I became the publisher of GQ at 34, and it was a vision, and it was a drive, and some luck and some timing and all those things. And, my story is not that unusual, because many people come to New York and try and find their way and find their own happiness. But it's been a phenomenal, I had a 40-year magazine publishing career, most recently as the president and publishing director of Hearst Magazines. And I got to the top of my game, but, it was, sometimes I sort of step back and say, how did this happen? This is phenomenal. I'm grateful every single day. So it took courage. It took, guts. It took bold steps, finding mentors, all the things that ultimately brought me, professional happiness and satisfaction.
You say something that is very beautiful in this book that I highlighted for myself, and it's don't obsess over your past, but own where you came from. And that's one part that, I always say that, being Latina, I always say that also to the fellow Latinos that are in this country. It's like, you've got to own where you come from. You've got to, because that's what makes you different. And I know that you've embraced that, and you've embraced your parents' stories, also very moving.
No, it is, one of the things that you think is a weakness actually is your source of strength, right? And just as you said, and New York City can be intimidating because of the incredible amount of successful, driven people. And so I think if you stick to your North Star, one of the great books that I read, it has a somber title, but it's really incredible. It's called The 5 Regrets of the Dying. And it was written by a hospice nurse who listened to people before they were moving on to their next life. And one of her top findings was, I wish I had been more true to myself. I wish I had listened to my own North Star, not my parents, not my family, not my husband, not my kids, but really what I want to do. And, I had a great role model, and I had an incredible mother who was, I would call her the reimagineer. She was, once again, no real education, raising 6 children in a tough neighborhood. And at the age of, in her late 40s, she decided that she was going to become a travel agent. And she walked into a local travel agency and said, I'll work for free. And she learned the business. She ended up traveling, to 40 countries, and she ended up backpacking in Europe at 57. And at 64, she asked my father for a divorce after 40 years with no real drama behind it, just that, she had a vision of her future. And that took enormous courage for someone from her background. She was bold, she moved forward, she always was rethinking. And I remember we lost Mom just before her 89th birthday, but I remember always asking her, Mom, what's your favorite future? And she was just one of these people who always was thinking about, how will I find fulfillment and satisfaction at this phase in my life? Because after her 6 kids were gone, she had to rethink her purpose, right? And then when she became the travel agent, that was her happiness period. And then when she left that, she had to rethink what's next. So I think this reimagining is a lifelong process that we never stop, and we should never stop, because it's important to always be thinking, where are we at this moment, and how do we want to change? And a lot of great stories, once again, in the book, of people who've mastered this. I call them the reimagineers.
Yes, wonderful inspirational stories. I know that you hate the word retire. Yeah. And you propose changing it to rewire or refire. Tell us a little bit. I love that, Michael, because it's so positive, right?
Yeah. You know, we live in a culture of ageism, and there's a lot of ageist words around and images around, and you know, we talk about midlife crisis, and I like to say it's a midlife awakening, because we now know ourselves so much better at 50 or 55 or 60, right? Yes, I don't like the word retire, because don't forget, in the 1940s, the average life expectancy was 62-ish, early 60s. So you kind of retired, and then you didn't live much longer. But now when you're 62, if you're healthy, you're going to live a lot of years. That's a lot of living and a lot of experiences. And so let's refire is the word I love. I don't like the words age appropriate. I like the words person appropriate, because you might decide to be a first-time parent at 50. You might start a new business or a career at 65. You may fall in love again at 80. And so let's be person appropriate, and let's get rid of a lot of the ageist words and images that we have. And a lot of that becomes self-imposed. And, there's a movement that this whole group of 50 plus now, the interesting stat, Nina, is that every single day, 10,000 people in America turn 65. And it's amazing. In the year 2030, 1 in 5 Americans will be 65 or older. And that group is going to redefine and rewrite the script as to how they want to live in their 60s and 70s and 80s. And a baby born today is going to have a shot at living to be 100. The projection is that in 2100, there'll be over 5 million 100-year-olds in this country, based on the models that are being used. And so the life cycles that we knew are going to be irrelevant, and it's all being redefined as we speak, and will be for the next decade. So it's really an exciting moment to like I say, roar in the title. To roar into your future.
which leads me to the next question. Let's talk about ROAR and what that stands for. What is that acronym? How do you break it down, Michael?
So it's an acronym that is in 4 parts, obviously, and it is a great formula that, as I said earlier, has lots of inspiration, but more importantly, action steps that you can take. So ROAR, the first R is reimagine, and what is your favorite future, and a whole discussion around that. The O is not only own where you came from, which you talked about earlier, but own your numbers, own your health numbers, own your financial numbers. A lot of people like to not think about it because it might be scary. I also like to say own your age. I don't like 60 as the new 40. I like 60 as the new 60. And let's be proud of it and showcase what 60 looks like. I mean, look at all the role models we have now that are celebrity role models, right? Own the fact that someday you're not going to be on this earth. So I like to say, if you're 50, go to 90, work backwards. What's your legacy? What's your contribution? What did you do? What did you leave? So owning it holistically. A is the action plan, and there's a whole chapter on what I call life layering, which I think is a wonderful formula for people. And then the R is reassess your relationships, because the people around you are going to be the ones who are going to facilitate whatever change you want to make in your life. So that's the simplified definition.
Can we talk a little bit about the people around you, and how, for those that are watching and are maybe stuck or transitioning, but are not so clear on what they want to do next, how do the friends come into play?
Well, first of all, you're an editor, and one of our star editors, I might add, in our industry. And you know the word editing, right? So I say, in midlife, you have to edit the people who are no longer really supporting you and where you want to go. And by the way, that may be family members, that may be longtime friends that you had, it may even be your partner. And you have to surround yourself with people who are going to embolden you and give you the support that you need. Because as you said earlier, change is hard. And, you know, it takes not just, it takes vision, but it also takes the practical steps of what you have to do. And, you know, so having those people around you, and those can be family, friends, community, work, you know, the right people, get the toxicity out of your life, because that is the fuel that's going to then hold you down if you have that toxicity around. And so I think the importance of reassessing your relationships is definitely part of the path to fulfillment and ultimate happiness.
What would the next step be for that person that is thinking, okay, I want to change, but I am not sure I have a plan. I am not sure what I'm good at. I know that I'm good at this job, but how do I how do I move on to the next?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'd answer that a couple of ways. One is you can't take it all on at once, because it becomes very daunting. You have to identify what it is and where you think you need to make a change, regardless of moving into your future. And all the people that I talk to, they spent a good year plus really doing the work. And you have to really do the work with yourself. And there are tools like, there's one in the book called the SWOT analysis, which is really thinking about your strengths, your weaknesses, the opportunities, your threats in your own life. You know, you may have a health condition that you have to think about, which could be a threat for what you want to do. But I say that's, you know, go through that deep, deep introspection on the change and then begin to make the practical steps. The other thing I say is to go back to your younger self. Go back to your younger self. What did you leave behind you that you pine for? And I'll give you a great example. One of the guys I interviewed in the book, his father said, I'll only pay for your college if you study business. And this guy wanted to be a social worker. He went on to study business, had a very successful business career. And at 50, he had a bit of a meltdown and he took some time off, and he was doing the ayahuasca ceremony in Peru, which you might be familiar with.
Right.
And he said, I was sitting on a rock and I looked across a pond and I saw my 16-year-old self. And I said, I'm so sorry that I abandoned you, which was, you know, gives me goosebumps just thinking about it and hearing it.
Because it's your dreams you've abandoned.
Right. And fortunately for him, he came back, he quit his job. He ended up moving into the social justice sphere. He's been doing that for 5-6 years. He started a nonprofit and he's found great fulfillment and happiness. But once again, he went back to his younger self, and he also, he also focused on what is it that he really wanted to do with his life. And I think that's the challenge that we all have, because it's always changing and always evolving. And we have to always be present with ourselves in terms of how we want to pursue the next thing at whatever phase of life we're in.
I also read in your book, Michael, that sometimes it's good to ask your close friends, how do you describe me? Or what do you describe strengths as? Because sometimes we're all too in our heads, or we're not self-aware.
Right. It's one of the great little exercises in the book that one can do. It's very simplistic. I say, so in my case, because I was curious about this, I went and asked 12 friends, 12 family members and friends, including my father, who the book is dedicated to, one of my great mentors in life, obviously, my dad, who's going to be 89. And, I asked them to give me describe me in 5 different words. And I was sort of like, gulp. I asked them all individually, and I was like, okay, let me see what I'm going to get back. But, 9 out of the 12 said generous, which to me is one of my, important traits that I work on: generosity of spirit, time, money, all the things that define generosity. So I was like, check. And, the other ones were loyal and, things that I really had as my own self-identification. And sometimes, it's a disconnect between who we think we are and who our immediate world, how they define us. I always like the example when someone says, oh, I'm very empathetic. And then your best friend says, well, you're really not that empathetic. So, do a little cross check with your friends and family just to make sure.
Yes, self-awareness sometimes is very hard for people. So I found that exercise really, really clever. Michael, I have a little game for you, true or false.
Okay, I'm ready.
That we can play. When we age, we lose our capacity to create. True or false?
Absolutely false. In fact, first of all, if you have a creative gene, which I think we all do, it's beautiful because it's a lifelong gene that just keeps fine-tuning itself. And you can, I'm thinking about Delia Owens, who wrote, her first novel at 70, When the Crawdads Sing, and it's been a global international bestseller. It's her first novel at 70, and hopefully she'll write many more. So no, it is a gene that keeps growing and expanding.
And we have to be open to that discovery. I think that sometimes people think that as we age, we're closing off, but we should be even more open to discover. Learning a new skill is possible at any age. True or false?
True. I mean, I love the concept of lifelong learning. You know that I went back to school in my 60s to do a master's degree at Columbia in nonprofit philanthropy. And I will tell you, as a 60-something, to take exams and sweat out tests and write papers. It's kind of like, but.
And how is that when you're old?
Actually, once I got into the groove, it was brilliant. I mean, it was 12 courses. I absolutely loved every minute of it. I was with a bunch of sort of mid-career professionals, younger people, and I brought them interesting insights and they brought me great insights. But I think this lifelong learning approach, and there's so many ways. I mean, obviously the people who are tuning in are lifelong learners, by the very fact that they're tuning in, but you don't have to get a degree. There are programs and programming and certificates and MOOCs, mass open online courses that are out there. You can, I think the 92nd Street Y is an enormous center of learning and creativity. And I'm always a regular, going there. But I think that we have to be students our entire life, and that was.
And it goes back to it goes back to the original idea that we're talking about happiness, because that creates fulfillment.
Yes.
And that's rewarding, which in tandem creates happiness. All right. With change is everywhere we look. At it, everywhere you look. Change is everywhere you look. True or false?
Totally true. Totally true. We all know that, first of all, if we've lived to be 50s or 60s, we know about change because we've lived it, we've ridden that wave, and we now know that change is organic to our existence. So hopefully, right. I mean, hopefully by then, we've begun to master it because once again, it's that midlife awakening. And so ride that wave of change and morph and grow and expand with it. It's a great trait to have. And it's one that we have to teach our younger colleagues and children and family members as well.
With change comes risk.
Yeah. I think, as we live longer, and you notice I say live longer, not get older. Once again, some language change. You might, there's calculated risk. We know enough to not do stupid things, hopefully, because we've probably done a few stupid things in our lives. We all have. And so we know the kind of risks that we want to take and not take. And, I think that can take many forms. There's it sounds like an oxymoron, but safe risks are things that we can do in our entire life. And I'll give you one example of a man that I wrote about who's the first 100-year-old to cross the finish line of a marathon. And I watched it because I watched him. I was running the Toronto Marathon where he did it. He ran his first marathon when he was 82. Now, some would say that was a bit of a risk to train for a marathon at 82. A health risk and all the things that we might imagine. But when I spoke to him, he had opened his mind to the fact that this was something that he could accomplish. And so, he didn't view it as a risk the way we're defining it. He viewed it sort of as a safe risk of something he could do to manifest something that he wanted to experience in his life. So, I think it's a great example, and you can think about this in all aspects of your life.
And I think with risk, I mean, you have to have a little risk to make it challenging. And again, with risk, there's reward, which again goes back to obviously a calculated risk.
Right.
And age, I think you also know how to make those calculated risks. Michael, what is the best piece of advice that you could leave our audience with?
I think the best piece, Nina, is I'm going back to that notion of being true to yourself and listening to your own North Star and really following that North Star, regardless of the noise around you, of the people who say you can't do this, or you can't do that, or your community, or your, the people just in your life. You have to be strong enough to say, this is what's going to bring me my source. And what I always say to people when they say, how do I do that? I said, go to your energy source. So my energy source is to go do a run in Central Park, and I get my energy from that. And then when I have my energy source, I look at my North Star and say, am I living the life I want to be living? And where am I going off the rails in one form or another? And just keeping that going. I also, and it's a practical thing, I like the idea of keeping a year-long life journal. And I check in on it the first week of every month,
Excellent. Nice.
And am I doing what I said I want to do with family and friends and travel and fitness and health and work and all those things? And it's a great, because then you keep your own feet to the fire. You can't blame anyone else. And if there's a barrier that it is June and you haven't moved on something, where's the barrier? Is it a person? Is it your partner? Is it your work? Or is it you? And I think being in charge of your own destiny and your own North Star and keeping your own feet to the fire will ultimately bring you the satisfaction and happiness that you're looking for. That's my message.
Michael, I love this time with you. Congratulations. You again have delivered a beautiful book, one that I will be gifting to all of my friends and family this Christmas. Let's roar, everyone. For Michael Clinton, thank you so much for your advice. This is a really inspirational book. I urge you all to read it. Wherever in your life you are, I really think it's incredibly helpful. Thank you, Michael Clinton. I love you. And Nina, thank you again.
Nina, I love you back. And it's always a pleasure. As I said, it's always a happy day when I'm with Nina Garcia.
Thank you. Likewise, right back at you.
Thank you.
Meta, I'm so happy to be here with you for the 92nd Street Y, the Happiness Summit. It's all happening right now with me and you, and we've had a few minutes before this actual recording just to connect with each other. And it's so great to be here and address coping with loss.
Absolutely. It's so good to see you again. And I'm so happy that you're able to provide a platform, because not many people are able to find ways, to cope with loss, or even, pay for therapy is expensive. And sometimes you feel lonely for many different reasons. It's really hard to deal with. So I'm happy that you're really addressing it and bringing light to it.
Thank you, Meta. And thank you for your support of the Care or Love Project, our 501c3, and Giving Grief Meaning. It means the world to have your support and to have a friend on the journey together.
Absolutely.
Can just talk about it, because everyone faces.
Well, I remember when I was 17 years old, I was actually playing basketball in Phoenix. I was with Lamar Odom, Elton Brand, some of my friends, Eric Barkley, Reggie Jesse, a couple of the guys went to the NBA. And we were 16 years old. And I got a call that my sister passed away with SIDS. And I remember coming back on that flight. It was like the longest flight ever. And it was like turbulence on the flight. Plane was dropping, and I was just sick, just trying to make my way back to New York City, from an AAU basketball tournament. And I remember that just affected me. I actually got her name tattooed on me. The next season I came out, we actually went 27-0 that season. And I was just, but although it gave me some fire and passion, it also was something that I didn't quite heal from, and that was probably one of the toughest things I had to cope with. And then in 2014, my sister passed away. She was only 38 years old too, but she passed away of cancer. My little sister passed away of SIDS. My older sister passed away of cervical cancer. And I remember in training camp not being able to sleep. I was with the Knicks. I was literally going to sleep at like 6 a.m., 8 a.m. I couldn't sleep at all. I was getting 2 hours of sleep. Then I had to wake up at like 9 to go to practice. I was cranky and didn't really cope with it or sit down and figure out a way, to let it go. And it actually got the worst of me. Got the best.
It's true. And when we sweep these things under the rug, I know for me, if I try to pretend it didn't happen, it gets bigger and uglier. And then all of a sudden, I'm acting out of that place. And I'm so happy that there are people like you where we can talk about the tools that we use. And I don't know about you, but for me, acting as if, contrary action, doing the opposite when I'm not feeling good about a situation or circumstance, sometimes just taking the time to take 3 breaths is one of the tools that I've used. And I've noticed that you've employed that so much, having been instigated before, and you had the great honor of working with Phil Jackson. And is that the right, am I saying the right name? He's
absolutely.
You've been inspired. How has he inspired your wellness journey? I'm really curious.
Yeah, I think, when you're talking about being able to balance your life and being able to kind of get through challenging times, it's always best to reflect and, and have some type of awareness of your center self. That's what Phil's about, Buddhism, meditation, awareness, calm, resolve. And sometimes we don't take time to think about that, from everything from his session that we would have, when he shuts the lights off in the video room before we start to watch game tape, and that's just a part of life. And he's not really thinking about basketball at that point. And, when you're going through different things, you're always able to reflect at those certain times. And I think he had a huge impact on my life.
I love that. And it shows. And we were talking before the taping began just about how the wellness community responded to your name change in that Buddhist tradition, metta. And I feel that, I feel that metta when I talk to you, and people were showing their appreciation so deeply. For those who are watching, Metta was really surrounded by the wellness community with people interested not only in his basketball, he's an NBA world champ, amazing, but people really came to him, thanking him for spreading awareness of that we don't hide our.
It's a little different because, a lot of people, we're not used to being vulnerable, right?
Yeah.
We're not used to asking for help, right? We're like, we can do it on our own, or I'm not going to let you know if I'm seeing a therapist. I'm not going to let you know if I'm dealing with loss. I'm not going to let you know how I'm feeling. And loss could be so many different things. It could be, some people lose their homes. Some people lose, relationships. Some people lose loved ones, So it's like, how do you grieve? You know, and even in the pandemic, we dealt with not personal losses. Some people have personal losses, but you know, globally, we had millions of people are lost. We lost, and as humans, we, you know, that it affects us more than what people think. You know, and then how do you deal with that, right? Sometimes you gotta, you know, reflect and ask yourself, am I actually going through something today? I don't feel like myself, you know?
And it's hard to feel like ourselves when we can't actually reach out and shake each other's hand and be together. Like, I know I would love to be sitting with you here today, and there is grief around that. Yes, there is the beauty of being able to connect with people in different states and different countries, and looking to that always brings a better state of mind, or a more expanded state of mind. But getting back to what you said about people wanting not to talk about their struggles, you changed the landscape of mental wellness by thanking your therapist publicly, and made it okay for people like me to say, yeah, I've been in therapy, I seek help, and made it possible for people like me to go on and write my book, Giving Grief Meaning, and talk about some of the darker subjects, like the loss that comes out of addiction, and the loss of course, of my child, Kara, which I know you and I relate to the pain of sudden infant death syndrome.
Yeah, very, very late. My sister died of sudden infant death. That's the first time I ever heard of it. I'm just like, what is SIDS? And then I learned about it, you know, and even then when I had my first child, I was really worried, because I had my first child literally 2 years after my sister passed away. And I was always worried about SIDS. You know, it was a tough one. Being 2.5 months, you're not even able to see the baby grow. And, you know, I did have a dream, I would say 13 years later. And I believe that it was her. And she actually appeared as a 13-year-old. I can't remember everything that happened in the dream, but it actually, you know, it was kind of, I would say, it just felt good, you know, to actually see her at an older age, you know, in my dream. Was it real? Was it not? You know, I'll leave that up for other people to debate, but it felt really good.
Ram Dass said that God is in the imagination, and the imagination is in God. And I think, I mean, if I can speak for you, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, I think we pay attention to the synchronicities. We pay attention to the beauty. We pay attention to the dreams. We pay attention to what's working. Like somehow we get up, the lights are turned on, my ring light's working, you know, the internet's on, we're here. And if I can just pay attention to those things that are working, I can be in a better headspace. I know, like so many people, well, today, you know, just the holidays are on us, and it's easy to get a Halloween hangover, a Thanksgiving hangover from either food, alcohol, whatever. And, you know, how do I forgive myself for having that 15th piece of candy?
Yeah, it's really hard.
How do
and
I
also, you know, the alcohol doesn't help. I remember being younger and thinking that I can just, you know, suppress with some alcohol, and that doesn't really work, right?
No. And you know what's interesting is people think there's this culture nowadays that says, okay, you know, I'm going to be happy. I need to take the edge off. I'm just going to have a drink of this. I'm going to overconsume that. That is short-lived, not authentic happiness through escape. Authentic happiness comes from feeling the pain of loss, from connecting like we are today, connecting, coping with loss, getting through together, getting through as brothers and sisters on the journey. And then out of that, by being able to hold my sadness, by being able to hold my pain, by being able to hold my not enoughness or vulnerability, as you said, by being able to hold that, I make space for more authentic joy.
I agree. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree, because you know, it's like you can't suppress it. You actually can deal with it face to face. I never really heard of it like that, but it just makes so much sense to hold on to it, address it face to face, versus having, a substance, kind of address it for you or suppress it for 10 minutes or even a day. Then you wake up feeling worse, the next day.
I love what's come out of just this brief discussion, and I would love to get together with you after this and continue the conversation. I actually took M out for Meta, and it's interesting, like the change of a name and what we name, and that's the subject of my book, Giving Grief Meaning, where the proceeds, as you know, go to the Care Love Project, which in turn supports great organizations like yours, our Test University, which helps kids who may not have the tools, who may not be able to come on, might not know that there's a resource like the 92nd Street Y and the Happiness Summit. Thank you for being part of that public voice. I mean, and that's what we're doing today. When we come out into the public eye and we embrace our vulnerability and see the strength in vulnerability. I love that you brought up the word vulnerable, because it's a word that should be celebrated. Absolutely. And I just applaud you for using that word and bringing that word to the children and seeing that we in the public, that we who have means, that we do have a responsibility. We do have a responsibility to educate, to connect authentically, to connect right here, right now. And I just appreciate your authentic voice. There's no BS with you. You're gonna just say it. And we've just so appreciated your work. You've helped make our program more visible.
Absolutely. And it's important. I hope more people understand what you're doing. And I'm always going to be here to support you. And thanks a lot.
I can't even tell you. And just a side note, best of luck with your app. There are people, I've been following you on Instagram, and I think it's wonderful. And I think that sports are so much a part of that, and getting people together and getting community together through sports. You've been such a champion of that and helping people come together, in whatever ways. Sports is so much a part of wellness. I've got my Peloton bike, that's my way to wellness. But if I didn't have that outlet, right, I wouldn't be able to connect with you in the way we connected this morning. And I love basketball too. And all things Meta.
Absolutely. We got to play basketball one day. It's been great. And I understand you're doing this for the 92nd Street Y, and you're going to have a nice, some great people watching today. So I definitely want to thank everyone that's watching, and thank you also.
Thank you. It's been great to be here at the Happiness Summit. And I don't know about you, but I feel better than when I got on, just connecting with someone and being real. And I hope the listeners feel that. And
I feel the same way. Absolutely. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Rabbi Joey Hessel, and I'm the Vice President of Jewish Life at the Bronfman Center for Jewish Life here at 92Y. We are thrilled to be hosting this important summit on happiness because it's such a Jewish value. For anyone who knows, Jews love to celebrate. We're even commanded to do so. We love to join together as a community. We join a minyan, 10 people or more, to count as an official community. As a Jewish community, we are used to coming together to serve each other in wonderful ways and during hard times as well. We try to lift each other up during those hard moments and to find the grace and the beauty even in those moments, as well, of course, as those in happy moments. There's a story about Moses. It's a midrash, a rabbinic story, as to why he was chosen to lead the Jewish people. There was a burning bush. I'm sure you've heard of this. And the story says that different people walked by and didn't notice that the burning bush was burning but not being consumed. They were too busy, they weren't present, they weren't aware. And then Moses came, and he saw that the bush was burning and it wasn't being consumed. And because he was aware of his surroundings, he was present in his surroundings, and that is why God chose Moses to be the leader of the Jewish people and lead them to the promised land. We have with us 3 experts in their field, preeminent scholars on this subject, Dr. Lisa Miller, Dr. Dasher Keltner, and Dr. Tal Ben-Shahar. Please enjoy.
Welcome. I'm delighted to see you this evening, joined by 2 of my treasured colleagues, Dr. Tal Ben-Shahar and Dr. Keltner. We'll be sharing with you our perspectives on spirituality, happiness, and ways to understand and move through this current period. We're each going to speak for about 5 minutes, and then we're going to engage in conversation. So as we near Thanksgiving, we wish the very best to you and your families, and may this be a time of renewal and joy. To start, my name is Dr. Lisa Miller. I'm a professor of 20 years at Columbia University. I'm sharing with you some of the findings we have on spirituality and renewal, and in particular, the impact on spirituality in moving through very, very difficult times, such as the time we've just faced with COVID and the trail end that to many people seems interminable. To share with you perhaps the 4 major findings of science, I'll nest what could be perhaps a bit dry in a story. And as a psychologist, I figure there's nowhere better than to start at home. So I'll share with you a story of trauma in my own life. A few years ago, my husband and I were very, very hungry to start a family. We had the things we thought we wanted. We had the jobs we wanted. We had the marriage we wanted. We had the home we wanted, but the kids just didn't seem to be coming. And in this experience of trying to conceive children, over the first 6 months, it was just disappointing. Over the first 18 months, it got a little depressing. But when we moved on to 3 and 4 years of not conceiving children, it became devastating. And one night I looked over and I didn't see my husband in the bed. He was lying on the floor. He was so depressed. And he said, "Our lives are hollow and meaningless without children." There was nothing we could do. We went to every top infertility doctor who we could find. We went to the people who invented in vitro using sea urchins. We went to Philadelphia and Boston and the West Coast. And all the while that we went through this downward spiral of despair, growing more and more depressed, I started to notice that right when I thought there was absolutely no hope, somebody would show up and they'd say the most unbelievable things. So for instance, after the 3rd failed in vitro, I was riding the bus down the street, hopped on this gentleman, and he was a little unusual. And I kept thinking, I hope he doesn't sit near me. And sure enough, this unusual gentleman came over and he sat right near me. And then he said, you look actually very nice, which I was relieved to hear because I'd hoped he would sit near me. He said, you actually look just like that type of woman that would go all over the world adopting children. And I thought, well, that's something I'd never thought of. But I persisted. I heard it, but I persisted. And so did my husband. We wanted a kid who looked like us, who we thought was so interesting and funny like us. We wanted our child. And so onward we went, head first. I might even say ego first in retrospect, looking for our child to be conceived. Fast forward, we're now on the 5th failed in vitro, lying in a very nice hotel in Philadelphia, and in solidarity, my husband by my side, when we found that the remote wouldn't change the channel on the TV, this overpriced TV. What channel of all channels were we watching? It was an interminable documentary on a street child standing in a garbage dump in South America. And through the translator, the child says, I don't care that I live here in the garbage dump. I don't care that I can't go to school, but it hurts so much to not be loved that I sniffed glue to make the pain go away. Now that one hit me a little harder than the guy on the bus, because there I was, full of pins and needles, full of medicines, lying in this overpriced hotel after a very expensive procedure. And this little fellow was saying all he had wanted was a mother, and that all that would have taken was love and commitment. So he'd been miserable for at least 5 years, and I'd been miserable now for 5 years. And I realized that the only thing coming between my husband and I and our beautiful family was that we had yet to wake up to the deeper nature of life and the deeper nature of parenthood. And gradually, as if little by little, our egos were being chipped away, we got the picture that actually parenting is not the kid who has the same nose or the same humor, or the same facial features. Parenting is deep love and deep commitment. And then as we went down this path of meaningful alignments, I might call them synchronicities, I became even more deeply aware, beyond the specificity of parenting, that the nature of life was not one in which the most important moments, the things that are most significant to our journey on earth, were controlled or concocted, that we could have A plus B plus C all lined up, but that didn't mean D was coming, but rather the deeper nature of life was a dialogue. The deeper nature of life was a two-way street between an open heart and the revelation of what is life showing me now. Whether the guy on the bus or the child in the garbage dump, what was life showing me now? Life was showing me that we weren't going to make a child, and no one does. That a child is a gift of God. The child is a gift of the universe. The child comes as a soul on earth, and who comes through all space and time is no more yours or no more not yours. If conceived in your body in a test tube, or if adopted or found through marriage, a child is your child because they are your spiritual child. This view of synchronicity opening my eyes, awakening me to the deeper nature of life, not as one to be controlled, but in a deep dialogue in living with spirit in and through life, in and through every one of us, led me to pursue in the lab a line of science that looked at the part of our brain, what I've come to call the awakened brain, that is a receptive form of perception. The form of perception that when we ask, what is life showing me now, like a ball in a catcher's net, receives the answer. And it may take time. This is a high pixel form of information that comes. It could take months or years to unfurl the fullness of that catch. But through the years of inquiry, through MRIs, through functional MRIs, through DTI, through many levels of analysis and science, we have come to see that every one of us is endowed with the capacity for transcendent awareness. And every one of us, by way of analogy, can strengthen this muscle. And if we do strengthen our awakened awareness, we are indeed less depressed. We are less drawn into addiction. We are far less at risk for suicide, because life no longer is understood by I got what I want or I didn't. I no longer say I feel gypped or I'm such a loser, but rather when I'm in deep awareness of this dialogue, the transcendent dialogue of spirit in and through life, life is full, life is abundant, life is loving, holding, and guiding, and we are never alone. We are absolutely never alone. Awakened awareness is all of ours. And when we realize our birthright, we become whole. Right now, in the tri-state area, in California, all over the world, we're coming out of a collective trauma. We have an opportunity to ask, yes, in our own homes, but more greatly and more significantly together, what is life showing us now? And what does my deep inner wisdom say about that? So that we will not simply be resilient or back to baseline, but that we're on the cusp of a 52 card pickup that yields a whole new rearrangement of meaning. We can live together in a more loving, guiding way, never leaving anyone alone. We can have a more awakened society. I'm going to ask if my colleagues now might share a few words. Dr. Keltner, professor at UC Berkeley. Thank you for joining us. You're up.
Thank you, Lisa. So thinking about the topic of our time together with two of my real favorite scholars in the science of happiness and meaning, and the topics of community and spirit, I think it's really important that we talk about something that William James was interested in for quite some time. It's been a fascinating emotion, really is the emotion of spirit and community, which is something we've been studying in my lab for about 15 years, which is awe. Just to give you sort of some of the scientific facts or findings, awe is when you are around vast mysteries, right? It could be a weather system or a supernatural event or somebody who astounds you with their kindness or courage. Remarkably, what we find, and this is one of the really striking findings in our work, is, we tend to think of awe as rare and something that only happens once or twice in a lifetime, but people are feeling awe 2 to 3 times a week. And as Lisa said, it's around us. I'll talk about the realms in which we find awe, but let me just briefly talk about a couple of its benefits or effects. Really good for your nervous system. It quiets down the inflammation response, which is problematic for health, gives you a greater sense of time. It reduces stress on a daily basis. It produces these epiphanies that really are probably served by what Lisa talked about, the awakened brain, or sort of a sense of transcendence. And the way that we've been thinking about them is that, and it echoes Lisa's language, which is when you feel awe out in nature or around a morally inspiring person or a piece of music or contemplation, it opens your mind to what I call the systems of life, right? And you see there's systems to stars or to tide pools, to human societies or dance movements. So it's just this remarkable emotion. I think when you put it all together, it's really hard to imagine, we're coming out of COVID, trying to find our rhythms again, and there's almost nothing you could do that won't get us back to a sense of community and spirit than awe. And it's right there for us to practice. So let me tell you how I've practiced it. And like Lisa, it really became poignant in coming out of trauma. 2.5 years ago, after a 2-year struggle with colon cancer, my younger brother passed away. For those of you who have watched colon cancer, it's horrific. He was my companion in awe through life. We were 1 year apart, did everything together. And I have to say, like some people feel coming out of the trauma of COVID, or you've lost a family member, the word that described how I felt was aweless. Nothing had meaning. I was in a state of, the things that I usually found deep meaning in, family members and foods and breezes and sunlight and so forth, just didn't move me. And at that moment, there was this voice in my head that said, you're grieving. Grief has its wonders, but it takes away where you find awe. And I went and rediscovered it. And really, this is what I've been encouraging people coming out of COVID. I got outside, every day. We've now done a study of what we call the awe walk with Virginia Sturm. People who are 75 years old or older, if you just go out once a week and look for awe on your regular walk, no matter where you are, it shows reductions in depression and anxiety. And I found that to be true for me. I sought out people who inspired me morally. My brother was a kind of a moral compass in my life. He was gone. His voice was gone. His wisdom was gone. And I found it in unusual people. The most powerful source of awe worldwide is courage, kindness, overcoming obstacles of people. And for me, it was volunteering in prison and just hearing the life stories, the way they're trying in restorative justice, trying to overcome lives of violence, just astounded me. You can turn to the arts. Culture has bequeathed us 100,000 years of artistic things like music and art and spiritual practice and the like. I don't understand classical music most often. I like it a lot. And I immersed myself in, classical music and had some awe experiences that got me insight into my brother's passing. And then I really, to Lisa's comment, our work aligns with Lisa's findings that spirit, our sense of spirit is everywhere. You know, some people find it surfing, some people will find it looking at clouds, some people find it in a certain kind of music, other people find it in contemplative practice. And, you know, just thinking of, and this was William James's point, that of pluralism, that we have this capacity to find spirit, what we think of as divine or transcendent, what I would call awe, almost anywhere. And to just think about that if you're meditating or if you're going to temple, just to sense the feeling that is possible. For me, it happened in a couple of places doing yoga and backpacking where it's like, wow, there's something bigger here that holds my brother, holds our lives, that allows us to go forward after the traumas that are part of living. And so, you know, I think coming out of COVID, our conversation around spirituality should be a complementary conversation about awe and wonder. And I am going to hand it over, or at least I'm not sure you are, to, I think, the pioneer in the teaching of happiness, Tal Ben-Shahar. I remember I was thinking about teaching happiness at Berkeley, and they're like, oh, there's this class at Harvard. It's the biggest class ever, and it's revolutionizing how university education. And that is our next voice today, which is Tal Ben-Shahar.
Thank you, Dakar, and thank you, Lisa, and thank you for inviting me. It's really great to be here. You know, we're going through a collective trauma right now, and we see levels of depression skyrocketing, anxiety skyrocketing. And the question is, what is the place of the science of happiness in these times? And one of my friends recently said to me, Tal, shouldn't we quarantine happiness? At least for a while. And my answer to that is no. The thing, though, is that we need to understand what are the areas, what are the places, what are the interventions within the science of happiness that can really, really help us. And of course, you know, we talked about spirituality, about awe. These are all things that can contribute. I want to talk about something which to many people seems paradoxical when it comes to happiness, and that is that the first step to bring about happiness is allowing in unhappiness. No, for years I've been writing about, thinking about, researching the notion of the permission to be human. And what the research shows very clearly is that the best way to deal with painful emotions is to invite them in. You know, there's a wonderful poem by Rumi 800 years ago called The Guest House. And in it, he writes about the importance of just inviting in any thought, any emotion, as if they were sent from the beyond. Well, I don't know if they were or were not sent from the beyond, but I do know that doing so, allowing any and all emotions in, actually helps us to better deal with them. That there is a paradox. And the paradox is that when we reject sadness or anxiety or anger or hatred or envy or frustration, when we reject these emotions only intensify. And paradoxically, when we embrace, when we accept these emotions, just allow them to flow through us naturally, that is when they do not overstay their welcome. So I've been talking about this for a very long time, but it only really came home to me how difficult it is to truly accept and embrace painful emotions. A few years ago, when I was teaching in one of my programs, and this was a year-long program, and the students have been with me for 11 months by that time, and we met in one of my favorite places in the world, Kripalu in the Berkshires in Massachusetts. And, you know, we were there, and there were, 200 students. There were around 20 teaching assistants, and we were all in this main hall. And time came for some conversation, Q&A. And a young woman put her hand up. She was sitting in the second row. And I pointed to her and she started to talk. And immediately I could see she was overwhelmed emotionally. And she said, I'm a psychotherapist. I have a PhD in psychology. I've been studying with you and other positive psychologists for a few years. And I feel that I'm considered by others to be an expert in the field. And yet sometimes I feel like I'm a fraud. And she looked down for a few seconds. And when she looked up, I could see she had tears in her eyes. And she says, you know, I sit in front of my clients in the clinic, and I help them become happier. I talk to them, they speak to me, they trust me. And yet, how can I do that? Because sometimes I go into these dark places. And what she meant by these dark places is that she experiences deep sadness, sometimes depression. And she said, how can I be their role model? How can I teach them? How can I help them when I go into these dark places? And she was, by this time, she was bawling. So I waited a little bit, and then I asked her, and I said to her, do you mind if I ask a question to the rest of the group? She says, sure. And I said to him, I said, please put your hand up if over the last 3 months you have been to one of those dark places. And then I addressed her again and I said, just look behind you, because she was sitting in front, and she looks back and she smiles because, of course, everyone, 220 or so people had their hand up. And I said to her, we all go into these dark places. It's part of the human condition. Buddha talked about it, and Daniel Wagner and Viktor Frankl and so many others talk about it. We all go into these dark places. And I say, I have my hand up too. I'll go into these dark places. And then I look at her and I notice something in her eyes, and I say to her, you don't believe me, do you? You don't believe me that I go into these dark places? And she said, no, I don't. Now, this is a young woman who's been my student for the past year. She has read my books where I talk about the importance of giving ourselves the permission to be human. I talk about us being guest houses, allowing in any and all emotions, that we all experience it, that it's inevitable. And yet deep down, what she really believes is, yeah, I experience it now, but when I become a real expert in happiness, in positive psychology, then I'll be exempt from these emotions. And it just dawned on me how important it is for us as teachers, for us as parents, to communicate as partners, to communicate to others that we too go into these dark places, and we don't need a pandemic to experience those hardships and difficulties and challenges. There are plenty of them to go around in normal times, whatever that means. And the key here, if we are to grow from that trauma, if we are to increase the likelihood, not guarantee, but increase the likelihood of post-traumatic growth, we need to first allowing in unhappiness, sadness, anxiety, frustration, confusion, whatever it is that we're feeling. And that is a first and very important step in the process of healing.
Thank you, Tal. That was very moving. So let's put our heads together and see if together we can shed light on some of the troubles that people are facing. If we were to reverse and go back in time to before the pandemic, before COVID ever hit, and think about perhaps some of the struggles that were so embedded in our culture that they were almost invisible. They were in the air and water of our daily life. COVID has done a 52 card pickup. We have indeed, as you say, Tal, been called inward through despair, through reflection. In difficult times, we pause. and consider. What, if we think about where we were before, could be different on this side of COVID? How might this time of regrouping, of hitting pause, of the forced retreat, of the journey into the center of the labyrinth, right here now in the center, provide a deep learning so that as we walk out of the labyrinth, we start to envision a new way of being? Any thoughts there?
Well, I mean, I'll start. When I teach happiness at Berkeley and in different contexts, we Tal's reflection taps into, I think, one of the fundamental problems is that we are in an era of anxiety and rejection of the difficulties of living. Our young people are way too anxious, and if you can just embrace the common humanity of struggle, which COVID has brought to light in some ways. There's always been polarized conflict about it as well. That's something that I think young people really, and our next generation, need to embrace. And then I think we need to be thinking about, you just hear about how the long-term care facilities have been devastated, and that's really a problem of loneliness and disconnect. And so coming back out of the labyrinth, we knew loneliness was an epidemic, and people are talking about how incredible it is to have conversations, and to make eye contact. And so how do we return to that? How do we slow things down a bit and be with other people a bit more? So I'm really struck by both of your reflections on that possibility, and hope we find a way.
Yeah, just to build on that, I think the most important thing to focus on is relationships. I mean, we know that the number one predictor of happiness on an individual level is quality time we spend with people we care about and who care about us. Number one predictor of national level of happiness is a supportive social network. And sometimes things need to get worse before they get better. Well, things were not good before the pandemic, and in a way, suddenly came the pandemic and social distancing, and we really can't, even if we want to, we can't see others. And what my hope is that people will stop taking for granted the fact that they can go out with friends and hang out with family and spend time with the loved ones or with strangers. No longer take it for granted, as it was taken for granted to a great extent only 18 months ago.
And Tal, I think that's so true. And I might even expand that to say, and treat people at work and at school as fellow souls on earth. For so long, I think our institutions have endorsed treating one another transactionally. How did I do in school versus the guy next to me? How much is that guy making compared to me? What can he do for me? I go to a dinner party and I can literally feel people measuring me. Where do you live? What block are you on? Where do you go? Purely transactional. But can we start to look at each other with an open heart and even show up in such a way as to be transformational? I want to know you. I want to support you. I want to help you realize your dreams, right? And that can be a student, that can be a coworker, that can be a boss. Just because we are in a transactional space doesn't mean we need to treat one another transactionally. And in fact, I think before COVID, mass society was on the edge of sociopathy, using people as means. This is our chance with an open heart to treat each other with love, with interest, as souls on earth.
Lisa, I wanted to ask you a question. Putting together these insights, as Tal said, I mean, the science of happiness is clear. Social connection, relationality is the first step. I love Laura Carstenson's work because she finds, when you're 60, 65, 70, you get happier because you realize that, right? That you're like, the success and this transactional stuff, that's, it has its place, but that's not the real truth here. And I'm curious, with your reference to awareness and awakening and a transcendent insight, how do we get our hyper individualistic culture to awaken to that idea. What do you think?
So, Doctor, one of the most beautiful findings in science that I've seen is that when we look at the awakened brain, the transcendent seat of awareness with which we are all endowed, which augments our perceptual field, we might ask the question, how do we build that muscle? Is it through prayer and meditation, right? Is it through walks in nature? And all of that indeed does strengthen awakened awareness. But when we looked over thousands of people, the single path to augmented spiritual awareness is love of neighbor. If I feel really stuck and really depressed and really angry and isolated, if I just put my feet first and do something kind for someone, it could be my neighbor, it could be the spouse I've been living with for 20 years. Love of neighbor jump starts the ability to see, if you will, God or the transcendent or the force of life in and through one another. And then we are more able to directly connect to God or transcendence or the force of life directly.
So I'm gonna relay it to Tal, because Tal said something really surprising, and I know he tracks the happiness literature as well as anybody, where he was talking about, you know, deepening social connections in the mind. It goes to family and my deep friends, and you also said strangers and acquaintances. So tell us about that. I'm curious because it feels like a thing to build on here.
Yeah, you know, so as I was saying that, I was thinking about the work of Barbara Fredrickson in Love 2.0, which, you know, many people read. And essentially what she talks about is that love is about, quote, positivity resonance. That the experience of love is when we connect to another person, and it could be, you know, to our nearest and dearest, but it could also be to a person on the street. You know, we see a little puppy and it's cute, and we look at each other and we smile at each other. That's positivity resonance.
Nice.
And that physiologically is not as intense, but it is the same ilk as the experience of love that we feel towards our nearest and dearest. Now, what she's doing there, you know, could be perceived as, okay, so you're lowering the bar on love. And yes, that is partially true. And that's not a bad thing, because no one says we can't experience love or awe a few times a week or even a day, because each time we experience it, it has ramifications. It has physiological consequences. And what it also does, it's connecting us to our highest self, our generous self, our kind self. So the more love we can experience, the more love we generate, and it becomes, of course, a self-reinforcing upward spiral. So
can I throw a pitch? I want to ask you both something. Yeah. This is okay. Love and awe. Okay, is it possible that when we move out of a state of narrow, what I call achieving awareness, strategy thinking, tactical thinking, moving ahead, and look in a more unitive way, that we are, yes, we are a point and we are a wave. We are unique and magnificently diverse, and we are one family of life. And when we see into the unitive reality, we're not just projecting that, but we're waking up to the fact that there is, in truth, ontologically, here and now, on some level, one world. So that love is a case. Awe is a magnificent expression of the awareness that we are part of one fabric of life. Can I throw that out for you to chew on?
Yeah, I mean, you know, when people feel awe, and we've studied it in 30 different countries, they'll say things like, the core to it was they feel a lot of this love, that this special kind of love that Tal was talking about, and they feel like I'm part of something larger that I wasn't aware of in my ordinary waking consciousness. Sometimes it's ecosystems, and people will feel like trees are aware and I sense their consciousness. Sometimes it's a collective. You're walking through a busy New York street and it's like, God, we're all kind of moving to this pattern. Sometimes it's light, you know, and I think that's the key and there are interesting speculations now about that may be one of the great cognitive achievements in the evolution of the human mind, is to see systems in the world that we're part of, right? And that's,
so then is love indeed, is awe indeed perception of something true and real. There is the level on which it is a unit of reality. And when we see that, it is profoundly moving.
Yeah, and you know, when we can experience that, or we can reach that state through the ABCs of psychology. So the A would stand for affect, which is emotion. The B would be behavior. The C would be cognition. So if we talk about the A, getting there through emotion, let's experience love, let's experience awe, and we expand as a result. So that's the effective path to systems. To understanding that we are one. The B, behavior, is through acts of kindness. That's what you talked about, Lisa, generosity, helping others, reaching out to thy neighbor. So that's through behavior. And then we, of course, have cognition. You know that the first class that I teach in a year-long certificate program on happiness is on systems thinking.
Wow.
So it's cognitive.
Yeah.
And yet it's a way, it's one of three ways, well, I'm sure there are more, but one of three ways that I can think of to enter the realm of wholeness with a W.
So this has been a beautiful conversation. We just have a few minutes. If you were to leave our friends with, we're going to go round twice, okay? Your favorite note of science is lap 1, and lap 2 is going to be something they might investigate, something they might explore to expand their lives. Should we do the science lap first? Who wants to go first?
And your question is the favorite finding or note of
Your
science?
favorite finding from science, a little present.
Oh. For me, it's that the brain has been wired to find delights in what we've been talking about, you know, dopamine release, oxytocin release, vagal tone activate, vagus nerve activation, all happen as a result of kindness. So something's happened that's rewired our nervous system to find delight in what we've been talking about. And that always excites me to learn that.
Well, there are so many things, but one thing that that comes to mind now is the importance of listening. You know that the number one predictor of extraordinary leadership, and leadership, it could be a Fortune 500 CEO, it could be a parent at home, a teacher in the classroom. Number one predictor of extraordinary leadership, which means the leadership we need today in extraordinary times, is the ability to listen. Not to be charismatic, not arousing speeches, not brilliance or strategic thinking. It's listening.
Wow.
Okay, and I guess I'll take a shot at this, which is that when we looked in the scanner, whether or not someone was Hindu, Jewish, Muslim, Catholic, spiritual, but not religious, they all showed the same neural correlates of spiritual awareness, what I call awakened awareness. There's one spiritual brain and we all have it, which certainly makes religious war look outdated, and which certainly looks the anxiety around don't say a word about spirituality in the public square. We're disintegrating of who we really are as human beings. Spirituality is our birthright. It is essential to our whole personhood. And when we strengthen that muscle, we're healthier, life is more abundant, life is far more full of promise and shining. Okay, now one lap more, final lap, a gift this time of a practice or an insight, an invitation.
Well, I'll make a pitch for the Awe Walk. You know, we have been doing these pilgrimages and fasting walks and for millennia, and we tested it in the lab. You know, these elderly people were in cities, they're in, you know, suburbs, they're in country areas. Just go find some awe once a week. And I love the philosopher Soren Kierkegaard, who was kind of a grouch, and he would do it out in the cities. And he said, it brought me into the chance encounters of what's significant in what I take to be insignificant normally. You know, just seeing strangers and patterns of kids going to school and blossoms on trees. Suddenly he's like, wow, the world is wondrous. So go out and do an awe walk and find something to wonder about.
And when you're back from the awe walk, go for a kindness walk. So this is my mom's exercise. So we talked about kindness and generosity and giving, and she suggested taking 15 minutes for intensive kindness. Just go out, you're in the supermarket, go out of your way to say hello, to talk to people, to help people, to, to give up your place in line or whatever it is for 15 minutes. And if you can do it once a week or once a day, imagine the kind of impact that you will have, because what we also know about kindness is that it's contagious. That's the kind of pandemic that we need.
Beautiful, beautiful. And I guess then I would share, next time you are absolutely miserable and you don't have what you want, and A plus B plus C was well prepared and strategized, and you still didn't get what you want, I invite you to consider the question, what is life showing me now?
Yeah.
And what does my deep inner wisdom, my deep knowing say about that? And that is a form of receptive perception that expands the field of possibility and is far more shining and full of promise than what we thought we wanted very often. What we thought we wanted was retroactive. It was based on everything over my shoulder in the past. What is life showing me now has a promise beyond what I could have possibly envisioned. It's a magnificent surprise. I want to thank you both. This was wonderful. And I'm so grateful your bios will be available as links so people can find you. I want to share with our family of listeners how grateful we are to be part of the community. Thank you.
Anxiety is a strange beast. As a psychiatrist, I've learned that anxiety and its close cousin panic are both born from fear. As a behavioral neuroscientist, I know that fear's main evolutionary function is helping us survive. In fact, fear is the oldest survival mechanism we've got. Fear helps us learn to avoid dangerous situations in the future through a process called negative reinforcement. For example, if we step out into a busy street, we turn our head and we see a car coming right at us, we instinctively jump back onto the safety of the sidewalk. Evolution made this really simple for us. So simple that we only need 3 elements in situations like this to learn: an environmental cue, a behavior, and a result. In this case, walking up to a busy street cues us to look both ways before crossing. The result of not getting killed helps us remember to repeat that action again in the future. Now, sometime in the last million years, humans evolved a new layer on top of our more primitive survival brain. It's called the prefrontal cortex. Involved in creativity and planning, the prefrontal cortex helps us think and plan for the future. It predicts what will happen in the future based on past experience. If information is lacking, our prefrontal cortex lays out different scenarios about what might happen and guesses which will be the most likely scenario to happen. It does this by running simulations based on previous events that are most similar. Enter anxiety. Defined as a feeling of worry, nervousness, or unease, typically about an imminent event or something with an uncertain outcome, anxiety comes up when our prefrontal cortices don't have enough information to accurately predict the future. We all saw how this happened with the novel coronavirus that was discovered at the end of 2019. Scientists raced to study the characteristics of any new virus so that we know precisely how contagious and deadly it is, and so we can act accordingly. Uncertainty abounds. Without accurate information, it is easy for our brains to spin stories of fear and dread. In addition to being fueled by uncertainty, anxiety is also contagious. In psychology, the spread of emotion from one person to another is aptly termed social contagion. Our own anxiety can be cued or triggered simply by talking to someone else who is anxious. Their fear for words are like a sneeze landing directly on our brain, emotionally infecting our prefrontal cortex and sending it out of control as it worries about everything from whether our family members will get sick to how our jobs will be affected, for example, with the COVID pandemic. Wall Street's a great example of social contagion. We watch the stock market spike and crash, the stock indices being a thermometer for how feverish our collective anxiety is at any one moment. Wall Street even has something known as the fear index, which with the coronavirus outstripped the financial meltdown of 2008. Now, when we can't control our anxiety, that emotional fever spikes into panic. One definition of panic is sudden, uncontrollable fear or anxiety, often causing wildly unthinking behavior. Overwhelmed by uncertainty and fear of the future, the rational thinking parts of our brains go offline. For example, with a pandemic, logically, we know that we don't need a 6-month supply of toilet paper or whatever. But when we see someone else's cart piled higher at the grocery store, their anxiety infects us and we go into survival mode. So how do we not panic? Too many times I've seen my anxious clinic patients try to suppress or think themselves out of their anxiety. Unfortunately, both willpower and reasoning rely on the prefrontal cortex, which isn't available at these critical moments. Instead, I start by teaching them how their brain works so that they can see how uncertainty weakens the brain's ability to deal with stress, priming it for anxiety when fear hits. I'll give you an example of a patient that I saw in my clinic. He was referred to me for anxiety. And when I started taking his history, he was describing how when he would drive on the highway, he would start to get panic attacks. And those panic attacks led him to avoid driving on the highway. He was also very overweight. And so what can I do as a psychiatrist? Well, maybe I should start with my own anxiety. So when I try to treat patients with medications, there's this number in medicine called number needed to treat, which gives us a sense for how well a treatment's going to work. For the best medications out there for anxiety, the number needed to treat is 5.2, which means for every 5 patients I treat, only one of them shows a significant reduction in anxiety symptoms. So how do I know which of these patients to treat? I'm basically playing the medication lottery. I don't know which ones are going to benefit, and I don't know how to help the other ones. Well, all too long, we've relied on willpower, just trying to think our way out of anxiety or trying to force ourselves not to get anxious. Yet that doesn't work so well either. As I love this quote that's attributed to Albert Einstein, in which he says, no problem can be solved from the same level of consciousness that created it. That's what this is all about. Our weak and young prefrontal cortex can't be relied on in times of anxiety. That's exactly when the prefrontal cortex goes offline. So here, I started to take a different approach. My lab had been studying habit change for a long time. We'd been looking at how to help people quit smoking and how to help people stop overeating and stop eating due to stress and boredom. And we'd gotten some pretty good results in a study that we did with helping people quit smoking. We actually got 5 times the quit rates of gold standard treatment in helping people quit smoking. We also got a 40% reduction in people eating when cued by craving in a study led by Ashley Mason at UCSF, a 40% reduction. And that was with an app. So we had been learning some things about how to help people change habits. And what had we been using? We'd been using something very simple, not necessarily easy, but simple, which is awareness. And what I'm going to do is talk about a 3-step process that we've been seeing where we can help people change habits, whether it's smoking or overeating or even worrying. And this 3-step process is something that anybody can employ in their own lives. Now, as I mentioned earlier, you need a trigger, a behavior, and a reward to form a habit. So how does anxiety actually get formed as a habit? Well, it turns out there's a fair amount of research from the 1980s. Thomas Borkovic and others suggested that worry gets reinforced in the same way as any other negatively reinforced behavior. That unpleasant feeling of anxiety or fear triggers the mental behavior of worrying. So behaviors aren't just about physically doing something like smoking or eating, but they can also be mental. Worrying counts as a mental behavior. And what's the reward of that? Well, the feeling of being in control, even if we're not really in control, or that feeling of at least we're doing something when we're worrying, is more rewarding than not doing something when we're anxious. Now, this anxiety can then trigger worry. Worry can then feed back and trigger more anxiety. So we can start to spiral out of control when we're anxious. So how can we work with this? Here's a 3-step process that's based on awareness and based on mindfulness training that my lab has been studying. I'm just going to mention for a minute or so some of the research that we've done so you can see that this isn't just some 3-step process that I made up, but a process that's based on the neuroscience of how our brain works and also the clinical science of what my lab has been studying, all the clinical trials that my lab has done over the last several decades. So first I'll say, that number needed to treat in medicine. When I give a medicine to a patient with anxiety, it's 1 in 5 are going to benefit from that. So what we did was we said, okay, can we take these neuroscience principles and can we start to train people to map out their own habit loops around anxiety? Can we help them bring awareness and curiosity in as a way to help them step out of these habit loops? And if we do that, how well does this help people overcome their anxiety? So the way that we tested this was by developing an app called Unwinding Anxiety. And we started with anxious physicians because I can speak personally. Physicians tend to be hard to work with. We've learned in medical school to armor up, to not, to compartmentalize our own needs and feelings, and to prioritize helping our patients over ourselves. Well, unfortunately, this has led to a huge epidemic of burnout in healthcare professionals, not just physicians, but many healthcare professionals. So we said, well, can we help anxious physicians? We did a study with anxious physicians, and we gave them this Unwinding Anxiety app and looked over the course of 3 months to see how much their anxiety reduced. And what we found was somewhat remarkable. We found a 57% reduction in clinically validated anxiety scales within 3 months of people using the program. Even more remarkable than that was we threw in some burnout questionnaires because what we found was at baseline in this study that there was a strong correlation between anxiety and certain elements of burnout. And lo and behold, we also found that certain elements of burnout reduced by up to 50% in this study because those two are tightly correlated without us even needing to mention the word burnout in this Unwinding Anxiety app. Now, this was a study, of about 40 physicians. It didn't have a control group. So we wanted to make sure that this wasn't just a fluke. 57% reduction in anxiety is pretty significant. So we got some funding from the NIH and we did a randomized controlled trial of people with generalized anxiety disorder. And we gave some of them, half the group was randomized to get usual clinical care so they could see their clinicians, get medications, whatever. And then the other half got that plus this Unwinding Anxiety app. You ready for this? After 2 months, we found a 67% reduction in anxiety, 67% reduction. And we also found that number needed to treat, remember with medications is 5.2. In this study, that number needed to treat was 1.6. So that was really remarkable in terms of, as a neuroscientist, it's nice to see these neuroscientific principles lining up. And as a clinician, it was nice to see that we could develop something that's accessible, that folks can download to their phone that can really help them reduce their anxiety significantly. Now, the hallmark of science is reproducibility. We had done 2 studies that were pretty positive. We also wanted to see if this Unwinding Anxiety app could help people with worry that was affecting their sleep. As a psychiatrist, I see a lot of my patients who come in and they have sleep problems. And I ask them this question. I say, when your head hits the pillow, what does your brain do? And their brain starts spinning like, oh, they regret things that they've done in the past. They beat themselves up over it, or they worry about what's going to come next. And then as they get revved up, because that's very anxiety provoking, they look over at the clock and they see that they're not getting to sleep, and they start worrying about how they're not getting enough sleep. So long story short, we did another study, another randomized controlled trial, and found, again, we could get significant reductions in anxiety. This was in individuals where anxiety was affecting their sleep. And we could also get significant reductions in sleep problems, in these NIH indices of worry that was affecting sleep. We get a 33% reduction in anxiety that was interfering with sleep. And this was, again, within 2 months. So all of that together suggests that, in fact, when we target these behavioral mechanisms, we might actually be able to see significant clinical results. Now, I won't go too much into the neuroscience, but I'll just say that we've studied how the brain changes when patients and when individuals participating in our research studies meditate. And we've found that with experienced meditators, networks of brain regions like the default mode network, which gets activated, the more we worry, the more this network gets activated. And the default mode network is involved in self-referential processing. So when we're worrying about things that are relating to us in the future, the more we worry, the more this default mode network gets activated. What we found about 10 years ago was that in experienced meditators, that same network of brain regions quiets down when somebody is meditating. And we found that curiosity, when somebody's being curious about their experience, the same thing happens. Just to summarize, about 10 years of research, what we found, not only do these brain regions get deactivated, but they can even correlate with clinical outcomes. In a study where with people that were trying to quit smoking, we found that when we used our app-based mindfulness training for smoking, we could target this default mode network, and that the more this default mode network got quiet, the more it predicted reductions in cigarette smoking. So that was really encouraging to see that we can line up these behavioral mechanisms, this reinforcement learning process that I've been talking about, and also these brain mechanisms. So let's go through these 3 steps of working with anxiety, working with worry, and I'll also say working with self-judgment, because this is a big area that I see where it gets in the way of people's happiness and their well-being, is when they're judging themselves. The trigger, remember that trigger behavior result process, the trigger is that they might have some thought about something that happened to them or something that they did. Their behavior is to judge themselves. And then the result is, even though they can't change the past, at least they can feel like they're doing something. So with these 3 steps of habit change, the first step is to be able to map out the process itself. If we can't see how our brain's working, we can't possibly work with them. I'll give you an example. I'll read an example of somebody who had used our Unwinding Anxiety app, who was mapping this process out for themselves. Person wrote, "For me, when I get anxious, I tend to spiral in negative thoughts, mostly about myself. The self-loathing and doubt get terrible. And for some reason, the only thing that makes it feel better is basically confessing to someone I respect or love in order to have them assure me that I'm not bad. I am a good person. So my thought pattern is this: trigger, well, there are a million. Behavior, feel guilty about some way in which I'm a bad person, and then turn to someone else to reassure me that I am a good person. The result? This only reinforces my brain's habit that I'm only a good person if someone else says so, thereby perpetuating my inability to get that reassurance from within. I think I've been aware of how anxiety makes me beat myself up for some time, but never made that connection about how that behavior of needing to confess to someone just perpetuates the cycle. So there's a great example of somebody mapping out that trigger behavior result process. How about my patient who was referred to me for anxiety, who had, was getting panic attacks while driving on the highway? In fact, this patient had full-blown panic disorder and generalized anxiety disorder. So what I did was I sent him home, and I gave him our Unwinding Anxiety app, and I said, hey, just map out this process and let me know what you discover. I set up a follow-up for him 2 weeks later. He came back, And the first thing he said to me was, "Hey doc, I lost 14 pounds." Remember, he was at a very unhealthy weight. And I said, "Well, what's going on there?" Because we hadn't even talked about weight loss yet. And he said, "Well, I was mapping out these anxiety habit loops." And he said, my habit was this: the trigger was the anxiety, the behavior was to eat. And then the result, well, I realized that it wasn't actually helping my anxiety. So I stopped doing that. He went on to lose over 150 pounds because he could map out this process and see that it wasn't serving him. So this is a really critical piece, and this speaks to the next step of the process. So once we've mapped out our habit loops, the second step is based on some neuroscience, which is that behavior is only going to get learned if it's rewarding, and we're only going to be able to change that behavior if it is unrewarding. So long story short, if we bring awareness in as we're doing a habit, so for example, worrying, my patient with his stress eating, he started paying attention to his stress eating, and he realized, oh, that stress eating isn't really rewarding. So he became disenchanted with it. And that started to change that reward value in his brain. So it was easier for him to step out of that habit loop. Notice how that wasn't about willpower. It was simply about awareness. The same is true for worrying. When we start to worry, we can notice, is this worrying solving the problem? Is it keeping my family member safe? Is it helping me, make sure that the future is certain? And when we see, no, it doesn't actually do any of those things, it only makes me more anxious, then we start to become disenchanted with that behavior itself. My lab has done studies with this. I won't go into the details, but we find that it only takes 10 to 15 times of somebody, like if somebody's struggling with overeating, for them to really pay attention as they overeat for that reward value to drop below zero. The same can be true for worrying. If we worry and we see that it's not helping us, we become disenchanted with it. If we beat ourselves up, if we judge ourselves and we see that that's not actually, helping us change something that happened in the past and is only making us feel bad about ourselves, we can start to become disenchanted with that behavior as well. I think of step 3 as finding that bigger, better offer. When our brains are disenchanted because they've really seen how unrewarding worrying is or beating ourselves up is, that opens up the space for our brains to find something better. And here, I like this quote from Einstein. He says, "I have no special talents. I'm only passionately curious." Here we can start to notice, okay, if worry doesn't feel that good for me, how does that feel compared to being curious about the feelings of anxiety in my body? When I beat myself up, or when I judge myself, how does that feel? And how does that compare to being kind to myself? So bigger, better offers are about finding intrinsically rewarding mental behaviors like kindness and curiosity as a way not to only step out of our old habit loops, but to step into a habit loop that's not only more rewarding, so we'll naturally continue to do it, but one that is helpful for us, one that doesn't just perpetuate an unhealthy habit loop. I'll read you a quote from somebody who was having panic attacks. This person wrote, "When I first started the program, I didn't quite buy into the benefits of curiosity. Today, I felt a wave of panic, and instead of immediate dread or fear, my automatic response was, that's interesting. That took the wind right out of its sails. I wasn't just saying it was interesting, I actually felt it. I was so thrilled." I'll read you one other example. This person said, "This has been truly life-altering. When I had a full-blown panic attack, looking inside made it just melt away. I was looking at what I was feeling instead of obsessing over why I was feeling it." So this is really the key. Step 1, map out a habit loop. Step 2, see what that behavior is and how rewarding it is. If we're worrying, how rewarding is that? If we're judging ourselves, how rewarding is that? And step 3, when we're worrying, can we be curious about what that feels like in our bodies instead? Does that help us be with that experience rather than feel like we have to do something about it? When we're judging ourselves, can we bring some kindness into ourselves? And what does that feel like as compared to beating ourselves up? So just to bring this to a close, how did my patient do? As I mentioned, he lost a bunch of weight by bringing this 3-step process in for himself when he was stress eating. How about his anxiety? Well, I teach at the School of Public Health at Brown University, which is in downtown Providence, Rhode Island. One time I was walking out of class onto Main Street where the School of Public Health is located, and this car pulls up. And this person rolls down his window, and it's my patient. And I looked at him and I was like, great, he's driving. And no kidding, he says to me, oh, hey, Dr. Judd, I'm an Uber driver now. I'm headed to the airport to pick someone up. So I just thought that was a really nice bookend where curiosity really can be our superpower to help us overcome all sorts of unhealthy habits, from stress eating to worrying to judging ourselves. I'll just end with a quote from a wonderful poem from Rumi, who said, "Be empty of worrying. Think of who created thought. Why do you stay in prison when the door is so wide open? Move outside the tangle of fear thinking. Live in silence. Flow down and down in always widening rings of being." And so just remember this: curiosity helps us open to, helps us turn toward, helps us widen and be connected with our world rather than turning away from it. Kindness helps us open to ourselves instead of beating ourselves up. And both of these can be superpowers to help us not only overcome sometimes long-standing habit loops of worry, of anxiety, of whatever, but also can help us start to form new habits of kindness, of connection, and of curiosity that can help us all move forward in this world, this ever-changing world. And we can all move forward together. Thank you very much.